из департамента образования и программ, который все это МФТИ, я приветствую всех, кто сегодня пришел. Полагаю, что еще будет напарывать, как обычно. Но очень хорошо на каждый случай пришел. Мы пригласили профессора Тима Кука в первую очередь, потому что у нас есть блистательная группа разговора, не менее блистательная группа студентов архитектора, наши базовые кафедры РУСНАНО, которые мы открыли в этом году, кафедра технического института. Пригласили студентов открытого университета Скобла, надеюсь, что мы пригласили вузы, с которыми мы сотрудничаем, по крайней мере, коллеги вузы, с которыми мы здесь у нас, как выяснилось, и владелец центра коммерциализации технологий есть. Одним словом, это заинтересовано, да, и пригласили сотрудников РУСНАНО, и вот те люди, кто с компьютерами, это сотрудники. Понятно, что они на рабочем месте, и им труднее других оторваться и полностью отдать себя на эти 2,5 часа этой темы. Более того, ну, как бы, РУСНАНО уже по определению, что это коммерциализация принимает. Уважаемые коллеги, сегодня перед вами выступит в течение 2,5 часов, почти 3, профессор Тима Кука. Вы знаете уже свою биографию, мы высылали помощь в этом плане. Можно и в интернете еще дополнительно поискать. Но, в общем, да, это человек, который совмещает в себе, счастливо совмещает в себе все 3 ипостаси. Он инженер, он работает в предприятии, он был успешным достаточно, когда он говорит, что Скобла был успешным инвестором, и в течение 10 лет из ничего поднимал и поднял на довольно высокий уровень центр коммерциализации технологий Оксфордской. Он вам не расскажет, и я готова к этому подписаться, что нет одного рецепта для одного способа работы. В Америке это делают одним образом, в другим. Забывал Шеффилд, рядом с которой у нас не будет работать в Оксфорде. У нас не будет работать точно все то, что там сделано в Оксфорде. Но мы можем использовать все то, что может лечь на нашу ментальность, на нашу почву, на наши традиции. Наверняка. Поэтому очень хотелось бы, чтобы это каким-то образом вам помогло в вашей дальнейшей работе, будь вы завтрашним стартапером или R&D-специалистом в инновационной компании или преподавателем, который эту тему раскрывает своим студентам. Ну и в завершение, точнее в начале этой лекции, я хочу сказать, что человек прилетел там на 2 дня, летел 12 часов, для того, чтобы выступить вчера в Сколково, вечером здесь, сегодня здесь, потом Бог нас хранит у людей домой, потому что сегодня у него день рождения. И он, наверное, должен встретить его со своей семьей. So, your birthday is today.
It is my birthday.
Congratulate your birthday. Итак, ladies and gentlemen, we work without a translation. You all know this, and I hope you will enjoy this lecture.
Thank you, Natalia. I want to talk to you about recognizing the commercial potential of university research, about developing that potential and making profit out of it, both for the people who develop it and also for the university and the researchers. And I'll talk quite a lot about human interactions because it is my view that this is the most important part of it. This is not a very English thing to talk about. We don't like talking about human relationships, but I think it is so important that I will be embarrassing myself and possibly embarrassing you as well by going into this touchy-feely area, which is not a very English thing to do. Before we start, I've been observing and operating in this for 21 years, and into this talk I've put what I think may be useful to you. Of course, you know much better than I know what is really going to be useful to you, so please interrupt as we go along with questions. If something is not clear, or if I say something that you know will not work in Russia, tell me, because I can tell you what we do in Oxford and why it works, but the most important thing is for you to use what I say to make something that will work here, and that needs your input as well as mine. Technology transfer needs a deep understanding of the institution, the research facility, the university, where the ideas are coming from, but also of the environment into which we're trying to transfer this technology. You live here, you will know about these things much better than I ever will, so please join in the discussion. If you're not feeling very brave, join in on behalf of your friends. They will be pleased that you've asked a question because they want to know, but they haven't the courage to ask. So please chip in. So the content of this talk, I will introduce the subject and myself and give you the message. That means if you get the message and then you go to sleep, it doesn't matter because the message is the only thing I want you to take away with you. I'll talk about the model we've developed over the last 15 years in Oxford and what the results of doing that were. Natalia said you were particularly interested in spin-out companies, which is my particular speciality, so I'll talk quite a lot about those. Some of the dirty tricks we use to work with academics in universities, which I've called technology transfer tactics. We work now with many universities as well as Oxford through a brand called ISIS Enterprise, and that is concerned with the economic impact on society of what happens in university research. And then a bit about culture change, because one of the benefits to the people who pay taxes is that an area can have its culture changed by using its universities more effectively. And I'll draw some conclusions at the end. So let me start with the introduction. I did a degree in physics in Oxford in the 1960s, and then I did a DPhil, which is the Oxford version of a PhD in cryogenics. I did a qualification in mechanical engineering because physics doesn't make you into a practical engineer, and a diploma in accountancy and finance because as you succeed in any sort of career, it's the accountants who will stop you doing what you want. So you need to learn to speak accounting as a foreign language so you can argue with the accountants and sometimes win. I was an engineer for 10 years in physics-based businesses, and then I managed some companies owned by other people for 7 years. I then met two rich guys who wanted to invest in science-based businesses, and by this time I was an experienced technology manager. So we started two companies, Oxford Semiconductor, which we sold to an American company, and Oxford Asymmetry, which we sold to a German company with a value of somewhere more than £300 million. Oxford Asymmetry was a spin-out from the chemistry department of Oxford University, and this was when I re-engaged with Oxford University, having left in 1972. Oxford University made £11 million from its shares in Oxford Asymmetry, for which it had invested zero. Oxford University thought this was a good idea, £11 million return on zero investment, so they invited me to develop ISIS Innovation so they could have lots more spin-outs, which is what I did for 10 years. I retired from my executive role there in 2007. I'm still on the board of ISIS, and I've joined the boards of a couple of other technology-based businesses. So you can see that I started my career in industry. I moved into investment. I went back into academia, then I went back to industry. So there's been no progress at all. I've ended up where I started, in small science-based businesses, but it's been an interesting journey. And these three boxes will be part of the basis of what I talk about later on. A few big questions, and the first one is, what is a university? Now, I'm sure if we went around the room, we'd have plenty of different definitions, so I'm going to give you my definition of what I think a real university is. I think a great university is solely defined by great academics. And by great academics, I mean great researchers, great thinkers, great teachers. I think a great university is not defined by great administrators, or great technology transferers, or even, with the greatest of respect, not even by great leaders, although, of course, those of us who inhabit List 2 help recruit and retain the really important people in List 1. Now, there are many different sorts of universities. There are universities that train nurses. There are universities that do nuclear physics. This is what I'm defining as a uniquely university. Now, the next big question is, what is a university for? And we could argue about this for the rest of the morning, but I'll tell you what I think. I think the principal products of a university are teaching and research. Not just any teaching and research, but university teaching and university research. There are few, if any, alternative sources of these. University teaching is not like school teaching or industrial training. It's a special sort of teaching. And university research is a special sort of research. It's not research to solve a problem that a company's got now. It's a search after new knowledge that doesn't currently exist. So these two products are rare and precious. A valuable byproduct of a university is commercial opportunities. There are many sources of commercial opportunities. As well as universities, there are all the companies in the world who are doing development work. There are all the inventors working in their garden shed, thinking things up. There's all the reference work from history you can draw on. So the reason I say that commercial opportunities are a byproduct is that there are lots of other ways of getting commercial opportunities as well as from researchers. Now, I've spent the last 20 years of my life working with this byproduct. I don't do much teaching and I don't do any research. So let me not undervalue this, but also let me make sure that you've got the message that I think it is less important than university teaching and university research. It is an error to design a production plant to maximize the output of the byproduct if this is detrimental to the quality of the main product. This is obvious to any industrialists. But if we don't remember that technology transfer comes at the end of research, I think the technology transferers stand right at the end of the research, and their job is to catch the ideas as they come out and commercialize them. If the technology transferers, like me, start working their way up the food chain and start telling the university what it should be researching, I think there's a serious danger that you'll turn some great universities into less than great contract research companies. Universities are not good at contract research because they contain such creative individuals who, as soon as you give them a problem to solve, will find something interesting and solve a different problem. So I'm quite passionate that our leading universities should create and disseminate new knowledge, not solve a problem for some commercial company as their prime objective. So here's the message. Technology transfer is about stimulating communication between two very different cultures, academia and business. These two cultures will not, in general, spontaneously understand each other, although there have always been the occasional multilinguists who are good at everything. Therefore, intermediaries are required, at least to start the process. Sometimes when you get the relationships going, they are self-sustaining. Sometimes they're not. But it only works if the intermediaries have a real understanding of both cultures, of the way the commercial world works and the way the academic world works. There is not a single recipe that always works. An important point I want to make to you is that I'm going to tell you what we do in Oxford now. It probably wouldn't have been the right thing to do in Oxford 10 years ago. It will probably not be the right thing for Oxford 10 years from now. And it will probably not be the recipe that works anywhere else. But what I want you to do is understand what's behind the practice that we've developed and then use those principles to develop what you're going to do in your own institutions. There are some underlying principles which I hope to get across to you. So the challenge, if you like, these two different cultures, let me caricature them for you. This is a slight oversimplification, but not great. So if I talk about a commercial company, the first thing about a commercial company is it is driven by external needs. You have to know who your customers are, who your potential customers are, what they want. And if you succeed in business, you work out correctly what your customers want. The company must have clear goals with commitments to the people who own it. If I'm going to invest in your company, I want you to tell me what you're going to do with my money, and I want to agree with you that that is what I want you to do with my money. And finally, in a company, all the good stuff is commercially confidential because we don't want the competition knowing about our crown jewels. If we now go into the university research lab and try and draw similar parallels, the first thing we find is that university research has, by its nature, got to be self-directed. We're travelling in a country where the maps haven't been drawn. What we do tomorrow is defined by what happened yesterday. If yesterday's experiment went this way, that says today we'll do this. If it went another way, we might have to completely rethink what we're going to do today. So although it has clear goals in the generation of knowledge, you can't actually say where you're going to arrive and when you're going to arrive because the map hasn't been drawn. And finally, an academic career is measured by the quality and quantity of how much work is published. So looking at these three pairs of parameters, you can see these tribes are very different in their internal values and practices. If I exaggerate even further, the view from industry is that academics never deliver, and if they do deliver, they deliver something else that isn't what you thought they were going to deliver. And the view from academia of industry is that they're all crooks out to steal our ideas without paying for them. Now, these are, of course, exaggerations, but they're not very great exaggerations. So when we set out on our task of trying to develop a trusting relationship between these two tribes, we can expect it to be difficult, and it is difficult. Before I leave these slides, let me be very clear. I don't think either of these cultures is correct or incorrect. I don't think one has more value than the other. They both have long and distinguished careers. They're just different. Yes, a question.
How will you define the intermediary objectives?
In about 3 slides' time. Remembering that I started my academic career as a physicist, I want to define these two civilizations as orthogonal value sets. Now, what this means is value sets that are at right angles to each other. So here's the academic axis, and here's the commercial axis. And I've drawn them at right angles to each other to emphasize the fact that people who live on this line, live up and down here, can't see this line. And the people who live up and down here can't see this line. Most industrialists I've met think they could run a university. Many academics I've met think they could run a business. They're both wrong. They don't know they're wrong. There's no point telling them they're wrong because they won't believe you. But that's why I've chosen to represent them as these two orthogonal value sets. Now, if we want them to work together, perhaps a good idea is to have a two-dimensional intermediary who has credibility in both tribes. So the project managers at ISIS Innovation, of which there are about 30 or 40, all have PhDs in science and have all had commercial jobs in companies. So they know how the two civilizations work because they've lived there. Now, you could say, surely they could read this in a book. I could read a book about what it's like to live in Shanghai in China. And I could probably then give a short talk on life in Shanghai. But this talk is never going to be as good as someone who's lived in Shanghai for 2 years, because there's a whole lot of unwritten rules that you only learn about somewhere when you've lived there for a couple of years. So the ISIS project manager can go to the academic, they can probably take off their tie and put on a jumper, go to the academic and put their arm around them and say, come with me to talk to these industrialists, I'll make sure they don't cheat you. And then they can put their tie back on and they can go to the industrialist and say, come with me, I'll make sure these academics don't waste your time. So they can use their own personal credibility in the two dimensions to start an interaction. And that's what they do. So that results in a license or in a consultancy where you're starting to get the two tribes working together. Now, what they find, of course, when they work together is that their preconceptions are actually misconceptions. The industrialists find that the academics do actually work hard. They do deliver most of what they promise. The academics find that the industrialists are on the whole honest and sometimes have more money than they've got and sometimes have better toys than they've got. So once you start them working together, a relationship can start to develop. But it very often needs the credibility of the intermediary in each civilization to start this interaction. The academic axis, of course, turns money into research, and the commercial axis turns research into products. So this all works well. We've been doing that for a long time. So let me talk a bit more about what we've set up in Oxford and how it works. A couple of things about Oxford University. There are about 10,000 researchers, including 5,000 doctoral students. It spends nearly £500 million a year on research. It goes up every year, and this is one of the highest spends in the UK. If we look at research spend against industrial companies in the UK, if Oxford University was an industrial company, it would be 12th in the UK. So it's big spend in real terms as well as in academic terms. A magazine did a survey and said Oxford is the most powerful UK research university. This is a magazine, so you can take that for what it's worth. Some venture capitalists did a survey and said Oxford is the most innovative UK university, but they're venture capitalists, so you can believe that if you like. And it's spent centuries developing methodologies for teaching, I think since 1188, and for scientific research, certainly since the 1700s. So you would be surprised if it hadn't got good at those two things, which I remind you of what I said are the principal products of a great university. And then the new baby was born. And in 1988, Oxford University started spending money. Well, it didn't actually spend any money, but it started looking seriously at commercialization. It only spent some money in 1997, and I'll tell you more about that later. So this is a new thing, and it's a new thing for most universities. This is where the research funding comes from. The biggest chunk is from the British taxpayer. This is from medical charities, the Wellcome Trust, the British Heart Foundation. Notice there's a small amount, 14 million in 400 million. Oh, right. Okay, you should get improved sound now. So a relatively small amount comes from industry. Now, there is a debate about whether this amount is far too small or far too big. The arguments for it being far too small are, surely industry should be pouring lots more money into Oxford University. The argument to say, just a minute, this is too big, is because we've got these very clever people, and is it right that they're spending their time working for commercial companies? Surely they should be thinking about the bigger picture and what's going to affect the world in 25 years. Or even just, how does this piece of stuff work? If you think about the laser... Yes?
I was just going to comment that one of the things that I've noticed since being in Russia is the tax slice for Russia is often greater than 25%.
Yeah. So that means that Russian business thinks it's worth putting money into universities. And that's fine, as long as they remember the other 75%, which is the non-industrial bit. I mean, and it's different for UK universities. Some UK universities make a point of how much they get from industry and how useful they are. Oxford, although we like to be useful to the world, not to the commercial sector of the world. Where was I? Okay, so the reporting structure in Oxford University, these are the bits of it that are now set up to support commercialisation. All the research departments in the university, and we have research departments for everything apart from veterinary science. I don't know why we don't do veterinary science, but that's the only thing that I don't think we do, and architecture. But they're all in these 4 divisions: social science, medical science, humanities, and maths and physical science. There is, of course, an administration in the university. I always draw this lower down on my diagrams than the academics. The academics think this is the right place for the administration. It's a support sector, not a management sector. And then there are chunks of the university that do the stuff that we're interested in today. So in the Said Business School, which is in the Social Sciences Division, there's the Science Enterprise Centre. These are some people whose job is to teach enterprise to anybody in the university, particularly researchers. I was the chairman of this thing when it was started, and we set up a course called the Basics of Business. This is, in North American terms, Business 101. So it has modules on business planning, cash flow forecasting, marketing, human resources, all the elementary elements of building a business. It runs for 2 hours on Tuesday evening. It's free. Anybody in the university can go to it. And we thought we'd get about 20 people would come down to the business school from the science labs to learn about this business stuff, as they call it. We have about 300 come. The biggest lecture theatre in our business school is 300, and it's full, and people sit on the steps. And this is not only research students. This is professors from the Department of Biochemistry. Now, because they're professors and respectable people, they say they're coming to see what it's like and whether they should send their students on it. But I know they're really interested in it. And this was a surprise to me when we started. Why would so many science academics go to the business school to be taught about cash flow forecasting, for example? And what it is, I think, you remember when I described the tribes and how much of a risk it is to an established academic to go to a company where they might not flatter him as much as he is in his lab, where he might embarrass himself and look silly. That's a personal risk to them, or a perceived personal risk. Going to the business school and sitting in a lecture theatre is safe. That's all right. We know how to do lectures because we've been doing those since we were students. And so I think it is a really good tool for helping nervous academics realise that business is not scary, it's actually quite fun. Now, in the Central University Administration is a Research Services Office. They administer all that pie chart of research grants. They don't apply for the grants, but they administer it and they help the academics raise their research money. ISIS Innovation I'll talk about a lot. It's a company wholly owned by the university to support technology transfer. And finally, the university has its wholly owned science park at Begbrook. There is a joke about the word Begbrook. Beg is the English word for ask for money. Broke is the English word for not having got any money. And in the university world, asking for money and not having got any money is the normal state of affairs. Now, that isn't why it's called the Begbrook Science Park. It actually is the name of the little village next to it, but it is an amusing coincidence. Finally, advising the University Council is a group of people called the Intellectual Property Advisory Group. This consists of the Managing Director of ISIS Innovation, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research, some senior academics, the Professor of Law, so a mixture of the administration and the academics in the university, and they develop and advise the university on its intellectual property policies and also resolve conflicts. If, when we're starting a spin-out company, ISIS Innovation and the researchers have a row and fall out over something, they can go to the Intellectual Property Advisory Group to seek a resolution of that row. In other words, the university has a mechanism for resolving these problems at a very high level in the university. It reports to the University Council, and that's important for me as the head of the Technology Transfer Office, that I've got a senior group in the university who I can go to for a decision. They don't always agree with me, but that's fine, because I'm managing a university asset. And if the university has decided I should give this away for less than I think it's worth, that's absolutely fine with me. It's the university's business, and I can go to the university instead of having a fight with Professor Important, which is something that technology transfer officers shouldn't have to do. So the key ingredients of the so-called Oxford model. One is there's a rich portfolio of wholly owned intellectual property rights. I'll talk about our intellectual property policy in a few minutes. The research is strong and world-class. There are over 700 different sources of research funding going into Oxford. It isn't funded by one large organisation who can influence and dictate what research is done, because there's lots of different ones. And if you can't get money from here to do what you want, you can try and get money from there. There is a clear intellectual property policy, which I'll describe on the next slide, which is led from the top and widely supported. This is not a policy which is imposed on academics against their will. It is developed by them and supported by them. The university has invested real money in technology transfer and research support. There are 100 people in the Research Services Office and ISIS Innovation helping support research and technology transfer. Between those four photographs on the previous slide, there is a clear internal demarcation of responsibility. In other words, we know who's supposed to do what, and just as important, who is not supposed to do what. But of course, between them, there's got to be effective internal and external communications, because you can't have different bits of the university fighting if you're trying to impress outsiders. So let me talk about the intellectual property policy, which was finalised in October 2000. It states the university claims ownership of all employees and all students' intellectual property rights resulting from university research activities. This is very radical. In 1985, all Oxford academics owned the intellectual property, personally owned the intellectual property they developed. So what happened over that 15-year period from 1985 to 2000? Well, there was a big negotiation. The university and the academics, the teaching staff, the non-teaching staff, representatives of graduate students, representatives of undergraduates, had lots and lots of discussions to develop to this policy. And finally, in October 2000, it was agreed. Now, why would the academics give up these rights? The answer is because the university set up machinery to assist those researchers who wish to commercialise their research. Notice who wish to is in bold italics. No one in Oxford is forced to commercialise. We encourage them to commercialise by ways I'll tell you in a minute. But remember, it's a university. The function of a university is teaching and research. Commercialisation is a byproduct, an important byproduct. And we do this commercialisation by patenting, licensing, starting companies and setting up academic consultancies. The researchers personally share the benefits. So when we do a license, for example, they get 60% of the royalties to start with, and the university gets all the costs. When we start a spin-out company, the academics get roughly the same amount of equity as the university gets, even though the university owns all the IP. When we set up consultancies for the academics in the university's name, they get 90% of the revenue. So there are big incentives, big financial incentives on the academics to do this. So let me now talk about ISIS Innovation. It is a company. It's a commercial company. It works under commercial law. It is not a department of the university. It was set up by the university and is 100% owned by the university. It is very important that it is 100% owned by the university. I've had lots of venture capital companies wanting to invest in ISIS Innovation because they think it will give them a front seat in the inventions coming out of the university. And I've refused this, not because I don't like money, but because I think as long as ISIS is wholly owned by the university, the researchers can feel safe that it's working in the university's interests alone, not trying to look after the returns to external shareholders. The academics are the shareholders of the university. And our job is to help researchers commercialise their research results, current activities, as I've mentioned, patenting, licensing, consulting, and setting up new companies. And these are average numbers, and I can give you more detail of that later on. So, what do the researchers actually get? Well, when we file a patent, ICIS Innovation files the patent, and the university pays for it. The university currently gives ICIS £2.5 million a year, which ICIS spends on patents on the university's intellectual property in the university's name. So we are managing the university's patenting fund. This is the only university money that goes to ICIS Innovation. ICIS pays for all its other expenses out of its own business. When we sign a license and the royalties start to come in, we keep them all until we've covered the costs of that patent. After that, we keep 30%, and the rest goes to the university and is shared out. And in the university statutes, it says how it's shared out. So for the first £72,000, after ICIS's 30%, the researchers get most of the rest. This 10% just covers the tax, the government tax on paying them this 60%. So big benefit to researchers. 60% of £72,000 is a significant sum of money for a researcher who has had no associated costs, apart from the time and energy they've spent in helping ICIS patent it. As the deals get bigger, the researcher's share comes down, the university starts taking more, and the researcher's department starts taking more. Now, this is good for ICIS because this means now that the head of the department has got some financial incentive to support our activities. And as the deals get bigger, it goes even further. So that's royalty sharing. If we look at when we start a new company, the initial equity is shared between the academics, and it's not only the people on the patent. If their lab technician is contributing to the business, they may well get some equity. The university itself, the investors who put the money in, and the managers. Now, the rules on this are less clear, but roughly the academic and university get similar amounts. Of course, there are arguments about why this is not fair. The academics will say, just a minute, this is my idea, I should get more than the university. On the other hand, the university might say, just a minute, we've been paying your salary for the last 20 years and we provide you with housing, heat and lighting. We own the intellectual property, we should get more than you. And both views are strongly held by some people in the university. However, 50-50 seemed reasonable. Now, when ICIS Innovation tries to start a new company, we might get a strongly opinionated academic who said, well, I'm not going to do this unless it's split 90-10 in my favour. And I say, well, you're perfectly entitled to that opinion, and you can take it to the Intellectual Property Advisory Group, who will adjudicate. Their next meeting is in 8 weeks' time. I suggest you make an appointment, and I will abide by their decision. And the academic said, well, I can't possibly wait 8 weeks. How do you feel about 60-40? And I said, well, yeah, I could probably recommend that to the university, but I'd be happier with 55-45. So this is a standard Oxford negotiating technique. We'll wait till you die unless you agree with us. And the academics, and it normally ends up around 55-45 in the academics' favour. And I'm quite happy with that, because a few percent either way doesn't really matter in the overall scheme of things, because if this company is a success, everybody will make a lot. And if it's a failure, we've wasted our time negotiating. So that's where it ends up. The investors, of course, get what they negotiate for. If you want me to invest in your company, you're going to have to give me as many shares as I want. And the managers get whatever they get, again, what they negotiate for. The problem with this is that everyone on the list has an effective veto. And what happens normally, when you add up what everybody wants, it comes to about 240%. Because you have 4 people, all of whom will not settle for less than 60. So what I do is write their names up on my whiteboard with 60, 60, 60, add it up, equals 240%. And then I say, oh, well, but there is Tim Cook's rule. And they say, whatever is that? And I say, oh, Tim Cook's rule is that the total equity in a company can never exceed 100%. Now, This is obvious to sophisticated people like you, and it's sort of obvious to them as well, but it's better than telling them that they're being silly. So we negotiate it down, and ISIS Innovation's job is to help all these disparate parties agree that they all want to do it on terms that don't exceed an aggregate 100%. And that's what we do. So the job is quite often dealing with very awkward people who are used to winning every argument. Investors don't like being told they can't have what they want. Academics certainly don't like being told they can't have what they want. So part of the job for the Tech Transfer Office is actually all this human relations stuff. Oxford academics are allowed, or indeed encouraged, to do 30 days personal consultancy a year, and the rules are that they keep the money. That's how it's been for a long time. However, the university must approve the contract, not the financial elements of the contract, but the part of the contract that says what the academics are selling to the people who are hiring them, because we don't want them selling something that they don't own, for example. ISIS has set up an optional service to help academics find consulting opportunities, negotiate the rates, and manage the administration. Some of the senior academics have been consulting for years, and they're very good at it, and they don't need our help. But the whole middle slew of them don't know how to go about this, but would like to do it because they like the external relationships and they like the money. So we help them do it. We negotiate rates for them. Academics, certainly Oxford academics, were really bad at getting well paid for what they do. There is a story, which I'm sure is untrue, of an Oxford academic who was invited to take part in a radio programme on his specialist subject for a fee of £500. And he wrote back to the BBC saying he'd be delighted to take part in their programme, and he enclosed his cheque for payment of their £500. He'd not got it. Now, they're not like that these days, but they do negotiate poor rates for themselves. We had one who came to ISIS and said, I've set up this consultancy for this many pounds a day. Would you like to help me with it? And ISIS renegotiated the fee to 4 times what the academic had been happy to do it for. Now, we took 10%, but times 4 minus 10% still made him our friend. So it's good for the TTO to help the academics do this. It also starts opening up relationships with academics that you don't have. It's a big step for them to decide to go into patenting. It's a much smaller step to do a couple of days consultancy work. So it's a good door opener for the Tech Transfer Office in the academic community. And if they use it, we keep 10%. So let me now talk about how stuff gets from inside the university to outside the university. These distinctions of inside and outside are organisationally very important to tech transfer officers. I've seen tech transfer officers who have got drawn into trying to resolve their university's internal management problems. It's a course with no successful outcome because the TTO never has enough authority to resolve the problem. It gives the university senior level an excuse for not addressing the problem by saying, oh, it's the TTO, and it can't have a happy ending. So I'm very keen on what is in the tech transfer company outside the university and what's inside the university administration and the responsible of the people paid to administer the university. So all that pie chart of research spend, I told you, is administered by the Research Services Office. There's about 50 of them, mostly graduates, and a third of them with postgraduate degrees. So they're clever people. There's a little team in there, 4 people, called the Intellectual Property Rights Management Team. And when a researcher comes to ISIS and says, I've had this great idea, when do I get a Ferrari? We explain to them that between the idea and getting the Ferrari is a few steps. And the first step is they have to fill in a form saying who funded their research. And this form goes to these people, and they check who owns the intellectual property rights. Because if there's been some commercial funding in the research, it may be that the company who funded it has got first refusal on the rights, in which case I don't want to spend my time at ISIS Innovation protecting these rights when we're going to get no benefit from them. Having done that, they then assign the intellectual property to ISIS, and we do our stuff of spin-outs, consulting and licenses. Quite often, as a result of this activity, the licensee or the spin-out says, I would like to sponsor some research in the university, because they want the academics who develop this patent to find some other chemical analogues, or they might want them to develop things a bit further. We refer that negotiation back inside the university. Remember how passionate I am that the university manages the university's business and ICIS manages the tech transfer business. Now, this is quite controversial and is not the same in other UK or other universities. Some universities manage their contract research from their technology transfer office, and the reasons for that are clear. The tech transfer office is talking to companies, they're used to dealing with commercial people, so they're probably the best people to set up a research contract. The arguments against it are, one, what do they know about research contracts? The answer is nothing. And the other thing is concerning the short memory span of university researchers. A professor may have done some research for company A 4 years ago, and as a result of that research, company A has some rights to some stuff that comes out of that professor's lab. 4 years later, he's forgotten about that, and he's working on something else, now funded by company B, who are his current sweetheart. And he sells company B the rights to this research, having forgotten about company A. This happened before I joined Oxford, but two companies, company A and B, sued each other, the professor personally and the university. Now, as a respectable university, you really don't want all this litigation. Now, to the credit of the university's legal team, this didn't go to court. It was all settled amicably, because what the professor had done was actually quite sensible. He'd given company A the stuff most relevant to them, and he'd given company B the stuff most relevant to them. But it was nothing to do with the contracts that the university had with them. So one benefit of this method is that all research is administered by the same team from within the university, and they would have known about this contract 4 years ago because it was in their records. Researchers' mindset is last year's money, this year's money, next year's money. They're so committed to and involved in what they're doing, they really can't be bothered with what happened 4 years ago because they've moved on, and they need rather duller administrators to safeguard them against this, which is why I'm recommending this model of the university managing the university's business and the tech transfer company managing the tech transfer business. So we did all that, and what were the results? Well, I started in 1997, and in 1990, this is the university's investment in patents, and in 1997 this figure was £40,000, which didn't pay for the salaries in ICIS. ICIS supported itself by raising industrial sponsorship, and I'll talk more about that later. But I persuaded the university that it should spend £1 million a year on patenting, and it agreed, and that's what it did. So, as a result of that, we were able to recruit some people and open some files and file some patents. And that went quite well. So then we persuaded them to spend £1.2 million a year for 5 years, and that went quite well. I retired in 2007. My successor, Tom Hockaday, was even better at this than me, and he's got the university spending £2.5 million a year on research. But don't forget, this started at 40,000 in 1997. This has taken a long time to build up. The rest of these numbers I've put on graphs to save your eyesight. So here's what's happened to the staff in ICIS since 1997. When I joined, there were 3 of us. There's now 62, I think. Of course, when you've got some people and you've got some patent budget, you can start some companies, you can sign some licenses. In 2003, we started helping academics with consultancy, and last year we signed about 300 consultancy contracts, so that went well. A few years later, we started an ICIS enterprise, which is selling our tech transfer expertise outside Oxford. All of ICIS innovation works for intellectual property generated in Oxford University, and that's what they do. ICIS enterprise is the bit that sells that expertise elsewhere, and you can see that that's grown rapidly. It turned over nearly 1.5 million last year. It's now got employees in Hong Kong and southern China. It's got some employees in Spain. I think there's one in Korea. there's a lot of need in other universities for this expertise. They also do, I'll talk about them later in fact. Now that's how it looks from inside ICIS Innovation. This is how it looks from the university's point of view. This blue line is how much of the university's money we spent on patents. Here's the 2.5 million I mentioned. The red line is the cash that ICIS Innovation sent back to the university. And you can see that in 2005 they crossed over. So before 2005 we were spending more cash on patents than we were sending back to the university. But since then the university has been actually getting net cash back from this. So it's now a profitable company. Now, to talk about spin-outs, I'm just checking where we are on time. We should be here at about 12 o'clock, and we are, that's all right. So I mentioned the two orthogonal axes of academia and commerce. When we're talking about spin-outs rather than consultancy or licensing, there is a third axis. There are investors, and investors are not the same as business people, as I will demonstrate on the next slide. So if I look at the three tribes, academic, industrial, who we've already done, and investors, and try and characterize them, and particularly try and identify their differences, the academic is an insider. They're inside the university, they're inside their research group, they do stuff inside. The industrial manager is obviously an insider. They only work for one company at a time, usually. But the investors are outsiders. They've come from outside the enterprise to put some money into it. Academics have one major focused interest. They're experts in the thing that they're experts in. Managers, of course, have one job at a time. But investors have lots of concurrent activities. They can invest in this and invest in that and buy these shares and sell those shares. For the academic, as I discussed right at the beginning, the route that they're going to travel is undefined at the start because they don't know how day one is going to turn out, and that'll fix what happens on day two. On the other hand, the managers have a coordinated plan, and the company, the members of the company, must have coherent activity. You can't have one department of the company following this policy and another department following an opposing policy. And the investors evaluate, invest, monitor, and then probably sell. But let's look what happens if it goes wrong. If it's not working in the research, you've got to find a workaround. You can't give up. I suppose you could stop and do something else, but you wouldn't have a very successful career. It's that every time there was a problem, you change subjects. The manager, of course, if it's not working, has to fix it. You know, there's no point, I'm the manager of this department and it's all terrible and it's not my fault. No, it doesn't work. The investor, on the other hand, if it's not working, they can sell the shares and go and play somewhere else. So there are significant differences on these three axes. So, as well as the two-dimensional one, you have the investors, and they live on their line out here. They think they understand academia and don't. They think they understand business and probably don't either. So if we're doing a spin-out, you need a three-dimensional intermediary because they've got to not only be credible with researchers and managers, but also with investors. And of course, the objective of the investment axis is to turn little money into big money. So in ICIS, as well as having these project managers, we have some ex-venture capital investors who know enough about the university to relate to the vertical plane here, but also can put on their rather smarter suits and go and talk to the investors and explain to them why this is a really great investment. Now, you raised a question earlier on about intermediaries, and so I've got lots of characterizations and advice for what intermediaries are and should do. The most important thing about the intermediary, any intermediary, whether you're trying to resolve a political unrest in the Middle East or whether you're trying to resolve political unrest between academics and business, must have a profound understanding of each culture. Because if they don't have a profound understanding of each culture, they won't be able to identify closely enough to reassure the members of that tribe. You could illustrate it by saying they have to explain German attitudes to life in French to a Frenchman. Or they have to explain French attitudes to life in German to a German. It's more than just being able to speak two languages. It's about understanding the inbuilt prejudices, fears, and habits of a civilization. But it's worse than that with a spin-out, because actually they've got to now explain both of those in Dutch to a Dutchman, because the Dutchman's the investor. So this is difficult stuff, and it's very easy to think you're good at it and not be good at it. So you need someone in your team who said, do we really understand what they're thinking? Yeah, I'm sure I understand what they're thinking. So I say what I think it is, and he says what he thinks it is. And it's completely different, because we haven't actually lived in their world for long enough. So, as I said, ISIS project managers have got science commercial and have some investors. I was talking to the head of the tech transfer office at the University of California at Berkeley, and she says when they recruit project managers, they have to have 2 out of 3 of research, commerce, and law. So if you're good at commerce and law, you might get a job at Berkeley, or if you're good at research and law. We are less keen on lawyers because I see the lawyers as part of the support to this activity rather than part of the protagonists. But it may just be the difference between the UK and California, or it may be that she's seen something that I haven't seen. Maybe lawyers can be creative as well as protective. I don't know what it's like here. You need to decide that. So the idea is that they can speak to anyone in their own language. So let's talk about spinning out. What happens is the researcher comes to ISIS Innovation and says, I've had an idea, when do I get a Porsche? And we say, no, there's more to it. So we give them an ISIS project manager, and they start working up what this company might be. They don't define the company. They think what it could possibly do and who would want one and how the money might work. Yes?
Do you take other teachers from, say, Cambridge or
No.
just focus on Oxford?
I personally have been working with Cambridge for the last 6 years to help them set up a thing exactly like ISIS Innovation, which they've now done. ISIS Enterprise works with universities everywhere. So I know they've got a project with Tomsk where they're looking at research done in Tomsk and looking at some projects. So ISIS Enterprise does. ISIS Innovation limited to Oxford. In Oxford, we say that ISIS Enterprise is limited to every university other than Oxford, because that's an Oxford way of looking at it. So the researcher comes to ISIS and says, I've had this brilliant idea, and they start working up a plan. And they'll introduce the team to some investors. We have a business angels network, and we'll probably find the managers. We've got people who are interested in managing spin-outs. But all this is very embryonic and undefined. It's not, here's the plan. It's, well, you do this and I'll do that, and we'll see how it goes. We introduce them to 3 sets of lawyers, 3 sets of accountants, and 3 sets of bankers. And this embryonic team, whatever it is, decides which it's going to go with. So we don't issue them with lawyers. We want to start them developing a corporate personality. And this is all unpaid. So we get these people to work for nothing. It's very good to get lawyers to work for nothing because they're not used to it. But when one of them does it, the others all have to do it. Now, why do they do this? Not because they're such generous, loving people. It's when the investment comes in, of course, they then become lawyers to a potential high-growth company. So they're investing, if you like, their marketing budget in helping us get the plan together. So the founder researchers become shareholders. The ISIS project manager hands over to a university director, if there is one. The investors become shareholders. Oxford academics are not allowed to have executive jobs in companies. If you want to join the company, you have to resign from the university. Not many do, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But they can be non-executive directors, so they can go to a board meeting once a month. They have got their 30 days, so they can have consultancy with their spin-out. Under the rules of university consultancy, that's fine. Now, the people strategy we use is we very rarely take out the head of the research group. Normally, we take out some postdocs, and we recruit a manager who's done managing before. My My friend summed it up by saying, when you're in the middle of the battlefield, it's not the place to start to learn using a gun. And I don't want managers who are learning how to manage while they're trying to build one of my spin-out companies. I want somebody who's done it before. There's still a good technology interchange between the head of the research group and these postdocs, because they've been working together for a long time and they know each other. He comes down to the company once a week and has a technical meeting. Then he goes back to the university. So the personality conflicts between these two can be controlled. Heads of research groups are very much kings in their kingdoms. It's very hard for them to be in what they consider to be their spin-out and not be number one. So they are quite troublesome. Similarly, it's very difficult for this guy if he's got someone who's got a much better relationship with his senior staff than he's got, undermining him all the time. So I prefer this model. When we started Oxford Asymmetry, we took 4 postdocs over here, and this was me. This was Professor Steve Davies, who is now the chairman of chemistry in Oxford. And he and I got on just fine, because he was doing what he was good at, and I was doing what I was good at. I'm sure he thinks he could have done this, but he didn't. He stayed as head of chemistry in Oxford, because that was much better for him. In this position, he can be far more productive for the company, because here he gets all the nutrients he needs. He spent his life getting good at this, so why would he want to stop doing it? Now, one of the problems you have is the academic's perception of the spin-out is different from the business perception of the spin-out. So here's the research group, which is 80% scientists and 20% secretaries and technicians. The high-cost, biggest part of the group are scientists. Of course, it's a university research group. And the low-cost 20% are the support staff. The company is completely different shaped. It may be 25% scientists, 25% production staff, 25% sales and marketing, 25% finance and admin. I mean, these are not laid down. But the point is that the expensive 75% of the company has to be fitted into the academic's perception of the low-cost 20% of the research group. And this is difficult. You know, it's a different set of priorities. And where it's particularly difficult is when you start talking about salaries. Because if I want to employ a very experienced marketing director in my spin-out company, his market rate salary may be significantly higher than the professor of something important in a university. And this is difficult because he's the professor's on the board of the company and he has to agree to this salary. So, and I don't want to fall out with him because, don't forget, the role of technology transfer is to support the researchers, not hit them. So the only way around it, I've found, is to use a joke. And the joke is as follows. A brain surgeon had a washing machine at his home that went wrong. And the brain surgeon employed a technician to repair his washing machine. And the technician did this, and he gave the brain surgeon a bill, and the hourly rate on the bill was very high. And the brain surgeon was angry, and he said, I'm a brain surgeon. I can't charge this level of fees. And the washing machine technician said, well, I couldn't when I used to be a brain surgeon. And it makes the point of market-related salaries without actually putting down Professor Important, who may well have a significant influence over my future career. So the two worlds are compatible, but only with active and sensitive interfacing. Now, different activities need different skills. In the spin-out phase, there are 3 lots of people, if you like. There are the researchers, there are the technology transferers, and then there are the shareholders in the company. And if you look at the skills they need, researchers need to be good at research, tech transferers need to be good at relationship building, and active shareholders need to be good at driving management. That's what shareholders do. They want to get more return on their investment. If you look at the motivations of these individuals, researchers, I believe, are motivated by research activity. I don't think they're that motivated by money, to be honest. If they were interested in money, they wouldn't work in universities. Tech transferers, I believe, are motivated by tech transfer. If I see something between Professor Clever and big business that only happened because I helped them work together. That's where I do my living. So I believe their motivation is tech transfer. And the shareholders, of course, their motivation is what their investment's going to be worth. And the reward, of course, is as I've said. So these are different, and the spin-out from the research stage to being a proper company stage goes through these three. So the researchers or the university delivers clean intellectual property rights to the tech transferers. They deliver a very baby company to the shareholders, and the shareholders grow it. And these transitions are all not without risk and require different changes of skills and values. So Natalia said I should tell you about what goes wrong, and I've got 3 or 4 slides of what goes wrong, and they're all from real life. So I'll talk about mistakes during the spinning out stage. If you like, these are birth mistakes. How we go about finding managers to run these things, which is difficult. A bit about cash flow and a bit about the stages in growing it. Although I would say that after 2 or 3 years, a spin-out company is just like any other company. I don't think its birth parents are that relevant once it's out there in the world with all the other companies. Anyway, here's some advice to academics and university tech transfer officers, and indeed to anybody who's advising in this area, which I'm sure RUSNANO does a lot of. The first thing is, you must monitor the social interactions. It's very easy for all these experts to be experts in what they do, and no one is expert in communication, and no one is looking after the communications. This is, of course, easier if there are 2 of you in your team, because one of you can be performing, and the other one can be sitting quietly watching and seeing that the guy who is being addressed is actually going through his emails on his phone, or is looking out the window, for example. Don't let investors mistake your confidence for arrogance. When research people, university people, are nervous, they come across as very aggressive and all-knowing, because they think this will generate confidence in the investors. Sometimes it has a counter effect. So again, remember point 1. You need to be confident because we're selling them a future. But if you overdo it, it'll put them off because they'll think you can't listen. It's better to undersell. When I'm selling something, I always undersell it first. Then when challenged, you come back more strongly. So for example, if I say there are 7 hospitals in Wales with cardiac units, and so we're forecasting these sales for our spin-out company, and the aggressive investor says, how do you know there are 7 cardiac units in Wales? So I make a big show of getting my notes and saying, oh no, there are 10 cardiac units in Wales, and these are their names. So he's destroyed then. He's not going to ask me any more stupid questions because he's embarrassed himself in front of his boss. And so always undersell on the first pitch, because then you've got a counterpunch when you're attacked. So when they challenge you, you come back strongly. I mean, these things are so valuable, you don't need to oversell them. Because if you oversell them, at some stage you're going to be found out, so undersell. Don't overestimate the knowledge of the investors. It's quite a common mistake to think because somebody has invested in a nanotechnology company, they know the vocabulary of nanotechnology. They might well not know it. They might just be investors. And the other thing is, don't overestimate their interest. Just because they've invited you to make a presentation doesn't mean they're interested. It means they might be interested if your presentation's any good. Again, I've seen people celebrating that they've been asked to present to investors. Now, the time to celebrate is when they've given you money, not when you've been asked to present. More ways to avoid problems. Don't get too clever. I've seen presentations from academics covered in drawings of molecules, or worse still, covered in equations. Most investors don't want this stuff, and it's a turn-off. Say what the science can do for them, demonstrate where the money comes out. I mentioned Oxford asymmetry. Steve Davis is a leading world authority on asymmetric organic synthesis. My team was me. I did chemistry in 1963 and got grade 3, I think, which is sort of better than chimpanzee, but it's only just a pass. One of my colleagues is a property developer, and one of them's an accountant. So what we know about organic chemistry can be written on the edge of a stamp. And yet we've been invited to invest in this fantastic opportunity by one of the world's leading authorities. Now, what Steve Davis said to me was the following. I run a research group in Oxford University with 20 people in it, and we are experts in making left and right-handed molecules. Left-handed thalidomide stops morning sickness. Right-handed thalidomide produces deformed babies. We have consultancy contracts with 4 leading pharmaceutical companies. And we want to set up a company to develop this technology. Now, as an investor, that's enough. I don't need him describing all this clever chemistry that none of us will understand. The fact that he's running a research group of 20, has got 250 peer-reviewed publications, and is consulting with 4 household name pharmaceuticals. That's all we need to know. So for universities, think of how your credibility can be established in the language of the people you're talking to, not in the academic world. Which is it. So we invested £100,000. And it was eventually worth £300 million. So that was good. So don't get too clever. Keep referring back to basics. The reason this is important is that this technology enables pharmaceutical companies to make drugs that don't deform babies. I mean, oversimplification, but oh yeah, of course, I've forgotten about that. Don't underestimate the importance of people issues. I keep going on about this, I know. Sometimes it's easier for universities to underestimate the time and the energy required to do this. One of the tricks I use in Oxford is I've got the papers associated with one spin-out we did, which is about this, of which about the top 5 centimetres is stuff prepared by lawyers. And so when a dewy-eyed academic comes up all enthusiastic, I say, there is going to be this much paper, and you're going to have to read quite a lot of it. I mean, it doesn't kill them, but I don't want them thinking, I've had an idea, now I'm going to be rich. There is some work involved between the two. I've seen spin-out companies pay advisors and then ignore their advice. This is a really bad idea. If the lawyer says, don't do this because it contravenes the Patent Act. Yes, but I don't think that applies. No, the lawyer said it does apply. No, but our case is special because we're working. So that's, if you're paying for advice, don't ignore it. On the other hand, don't follow advice from incompetent advisors. Now, this is slightly personal, but just because something is clearly presented doesn't mean it's true. I mean, I'm giving you all this stuff, and you're sitting there taking it, and I think I'm being honest with you. But you should always have in the back of your mind that I might just be selling you a story. So you must, if you're acting on people's advice, find other people who they've advised and find out whether it worked or not. And finally, don't overestimate your colleagues' commitment. Just because you are really keen on this, and because your 4 weaker-willed colleagues haven't told you it's a stupid idea, doesn't mean that they're as committed to it as you are. I have seen teams who, when they've got to the final hurdle, have lost 3/4 of the team because they've got bored and gone to do something else. So, what are the key elements in a successful startup? The one that's more important than anything is leadership. Because if you have a good leader, all the other elements will be taken care of. I've already said a battlefield is not the place to learn to use a gun. Really get someone who's done it. If you don't do anything else right in your startup, get the right leader. You need leadership with experience under stressful conditions. You don't want someone who's always worked for a successful firm, because they're used to working in successful environments, and you're going to have some unsuccessful environments. Spin-outs are more difficult than just starting a company, because you've got everything to do with starting a company, employees, insurance, premises, cash, and you've got to deal with the university. And to be honest, dealing with the university is not a simple thing. I'll talk about that later. On the other hand, a properly managed relationship with the university is a massive asset. Just having Oxford University on your shareholders list gives your company some credibility that it would be greater than if you didn't have a university on the shareholders list. The second after leadership is a clear business idea. You really do have to know what the story is. And I would suggest you write it down in 2 lines and everybody reads it to themselves every morning. Because quite often when you've got a highly active, motivated team, they'll start modifying the mission in their own mind as they go along in the light of what they learn. And there's the story of the company chairman who says, I'm pretty sure we all know what we're doing, don't we? And all the guys will say, oh yes, we all know what we're doing. And they've got completely different stories. So having a clearly expressed, you can call it a mission statement if you want, which you regularly read to each other, I think is important. Now, it may change with time. When we started Oxford Asymmetry, our mission was we made 10 grams of stuff that we sold to people for lots of money. As we got better established, companies would commission us to develop synthesis routes for stuff they wanted. And as we got better past that, people would want to buy 2 kilograms of some exotic chemical from us to run a clinical trial. So there are 3 completely different or developing missions, but it's pretty important that the company knows which of those it's on at any one time. Because if we were in the 10-gram production in the lab by research chemist phase, and somebody went and sold 2 kilograms of this stuff for a lot of money, we wouldn't be able to do it because we'd have to start finding contract manufacturers and everything. So it is really important that if the mission is changing with time, everybody knows when it changes and what it's changed to. You, of course, need enough cash to get to the next stage. And the next stage might well not be cash generation. There are companies that have round after round after round of cash raising, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. But you must have enough cash, I would say, to get just past the next stage, because things always go slower than you'd planned. Another massive asset is a network of knowledgeable individuals. This is difficult to formalise, and it may be the investors, or the investors may know somebody, or the academics may know somebody, or the university TTO may know somebody, but what's characteristic of these successful startups is they know a lot of useful people who they can ring up and ask about stuff. But don't mistake eloquent presentation for knowledge. Eloquent presentation is eloquent presentation. It may be eloquent presentation of rubbish. So don't mistake the quality of the documentation for the quality of the content. A few points for academics. The first thing is to remember is it's a deal. Academics are used to being given a grant and they do the research at the end. The grant-giving body never asks for their money back, which investors do. If someone invests in a company, they think they're going to get their money back out at some stage. More than that, they think they're going to get more out than they put in. So this is difficult. I mean, it's not difficult intellectually. It's difficult spiritually to internalize. You'll have to give the investors something for their money. The second thing is you're selling futures. You know, we've got this piece of paper and we expect you to give us £500,000. So the future has to be as credible as possible. And the people making the presentation have to look as credible as possible. This is verging on the hypersensitive. If you have academics coming with you for a presentation and they're in their jeans and ban the bomb t-shirt, this is not going to impress a bunch of investors in suits. Similarly, if they're in suits and you're going to some hip investors who are in jeans and ban the bomb t-shirts, that's equally wrong. I've never had that problem. But if you say to the academic, would you mind wearing a tie? They will probably be hugely insulted. But it's really important. Some academics will say, oh, they're just going to have to take me as I am. Well, they might not take you. They might not give you them. Oh, shit. So it is when you're selling the story that all the elements of your presentation, including the documentation and your presentation and whether you arrive on time and the vocabulary and everything, are consistent. You can, of course, as an academic, use the investor's resources to enhance the value of the thing that you're selling them. Because if you're smart, you talk to the investors about how it might go, and they'll say, oh yes, well, of course, we have this this subsidiary company who could do a lot with this. And so when you finally make your presentation, you say, and there is an opportunity for this work with this subsidiary company that the investors have actually brought, which enables you to enhance the value of the thing you're selling them. So you can recruit the investors into your team, but it's dangerous to try and outsmart them because successful investors are pretty smart people. The people issues are, as ever, crucial. And finally, it's supposed to be fun. If this is never fun, it's probably not the thing for you to do. At least it's supposed to be fun some of the time, because this is hard and dangerous work, and if you're not enjoying it, you're probably not going to be very good at it. So, a few points for investors. Help the university to understand your potential contribution to their projects, particularly the non-financial part. When universities look for investment, they think they're looking for money. I think the value of successful investors is they bring a lot more than money. When my two rich friends invested in Oxford Cemetery, I worked full-time for the company for no salary for 2 years. Now, I did stuff for them which wasn't costing the company anything. I mean, we could have organised it just the same by the investors putting a bit more money in and me drawing a salary, but all the messages would then be the wrong way round for the chemists. They saw the investors and me as an asset, rather than seeing the investors as an asset and me as a cost on their company. The facts are the same either way, but the perception was very different. And certainly the academics may well be unaware of what really useful investors can contribute in addition to money. It's worth the investors ensuring that the other side of the negotiation have good advisors. If you're trying to do a deal with someone and they have incompetent lawyers, it isn't a help. You might think it's a help because you might think, we'll be able to cheat them. But in fact, you won't cheat them because by the end, you'll have been found out. And you might end up not doing a deal. Because if they've got incompetent advisors, they may just insist on holding out for a price that you're not going to pay. So it is helpful if the other side have got bad advisors. It's worth helping them get better advice. I don't mean advisors biased in your favour. I just mean competent advisors who will properly look after the other side's interests. Remember, academic values differ from commercial values, and academics make decisions in their own cultural values. So you have to present the data to them in a format they can process, as do investors. So, more ways of failing. One good one is if the members of the team don't like each other. They might have said they liked each other when you were giving them the money, but it turns out they've never liked each other. So you do need a clear plan detailing who's going to do what and what you're going to do if there's a terminal falling out. Now, if you've got a competent leader, they'll deal with this. If you've got an incompetent leader, they may be one of the people involved in the falling out. So when you're recruiting a leader, a really good question is, how many times have you done this before? And if they haven't done it before, what makes you think they're going to do it this time? Don't take management advice from people who haven't succeeded in management. Everybody thinks they know about management. Everybody will give you advice, but see what they've done before. If they've only worked in successful companies, why do you think that success was anything to do with them? They might have just been lucky in their employer. So you need to know what they have done, not that they work for this highly successful company. Another failure mode is to stay on plan A, even if the cash is running out faster than you thought it would. So the counter move to this is to have an eloquent internal critic. Now, nobody likes internal critics because we're all trying to be dynamic and upbeat and drive our company forward. And there's this miserable so-and-so at the end of the table who always says, I'm not sure this is going to work. But you do need those because every so often they're going to be right. And when they're right, it's better to find out before you've fallen out of the aeroplane. Don't bet everything on a single deal. It is very easy for a small startup company to be dazzled by a big company dangling a contract, saying, oh, we've got this interest from Glaxo. and they're going to give us £4 million, and it'll be all great, because that solves all our financial worries. And what then happens is it goes on for week after week, and the company is getting closer and closer to running out of cash. And the big company's not actually keen on saving them, it's actually waiting for them to go bust so it can buy the intellectual property cheap off the administrator. So always have plans B, C and D. When we took venture capital into Oxford Asymmetry, we had plan A and plan B. Plan A was we didn't need any money and we were going to grow at a modest rate. Plan B was, if you want to invest £2.5 million, we can use plan A and it'll grow faster. But we don't need your money, so it's up to you. This meant that we could negotiate a really good rate, and in fact we sold them 15% of the company for 2.2 million when we'd only invested a total of 0.6 million. So that was a massive uplift in value, because my colleague, the finance director, had plan A and plan B, and plan A didn't need their money. So have an option. And finally, I have seen all these in real life. These are not made up horror stories that I've made up for your benefit. And in most of those cases, they killed the company. Different companies, but they're not gratuitous misery I've invented for your benefit. Now, one question that often comes up at this stage is, where do you get these fantastic leaders for spin-out companies? And the answer is, from the network with great difficulty. When we started Oxford Asymmetry, there was only one piece of business at the first board meeting, and that was, we'll make the investment and we will headhunt a leader. And T. Cook can run the company as a caretaker manager for the first 3 months till we get the super person in. Now remember, my chemistry is chimpanzee plus. Yes?
What's a super leader except for experience?
Sorry?
You emphasize that a leader should have some experience, some negative experience perhaps, but what are the other things?
Ability to lead. I mean, and by ability to lead, I mean ability to evolve a mission, sell that mission, take other people in that mission. They don't have to be brilliant chemists or brilliant accountants or brilliant lawyers or any of that. So let me talk about Oxford Asymmetry. So this is a state-of-the-art chemistry company, and I'm a subhuman chemist in their terms. So I'm going to run it for 3 months, and then we're going to recruit a super person, and I'm going to go away and be an investor, and that'll be fine. Well, it took us 2 years to recruit a competent leader, which was, potential disaster. And I ended up managing a state-of-the-art chemistry company for 2 years. To give you a measure of how embarrassing it was, I could not pronounce the name of the products we made. They were these 14-syllable organic, dioxyhydrofibro stuff. We were sitting in a car park outside Glaxo in Greenford in London to sell them some stuff for £25,000 a gram or something. And I had on a piece of paper the name of this stuff, and I was honestly in the car practicing saying this really long word. So I am not a great chemist. Anyway, it all went on for 2 years, and it seemed to be going quite well. Now, to be fair, everybody else in the company was a fantastic chemist, but I didn't seem to be a drawback on the company. Why was this? Well, one of my co-investors, the property developer, came up with this picture. And the idea is that if your job is to get the rowing boat away from the beach, the direction you need to steer is obvious. You don't need to be an expert in global navigation or world pharmaceutical markets, because you've just got to be able to get boats off beaches. Now, 2 years further on, when you've had some investment, you've got a much bigger boat. And now it matters where you steer it. But of course, by this time, you're rich enough to employ the sailor with the gold braid on his hat, who knows about global navigation and pharmaceutical markets, which is what we did. And then you send the rowing boat man back to the beach for another rowing boat. In my case, I went to ISIS Innovation. But we have some guys in Oxford who go round this loop several times. They get a rowing boat off the beach, get the company into some sort of shape, and then you can recruit a proper leader. You might ask why it took us 2 years to find this person. And the answer is, we had good candidates came for 3 or 4 interviews to the company. Remember, the company was 4 men in a shed. I mean, it was not a big company. And they get all enthusiastic, and then they go home and talk to their wives or husbands, who would say, well, what's the security? Well, this is 4 men in a shed. Well, what's the executive pension plan? Oh, they haven't got one of those. Well, do you get a company car? And suddenly, it's scary. My headhunting friend said, when you're on the deck of the cruise ship and you see the little speedboat scudding about among the waves, it looks really good fun. But when you go down the ladder down the side and it's all going up and down and the water splashing you, the first-class dining room looks increasingly inviting. And so they all went back to their big companies. And it was only after 2 years that, by this time, the company was up to about 20 people, that one of them took the plunge. And in fact, what happened is it was someone an Englishman working for an Italian pharmaceutical company who personally wanted to move back to England. And that was the tipping factor that caused him to take the job. So that's a bit about rowing boats. Now, let me talk about cash flow. This is what I've called the European model, where you put in a modest investment and you get a modest return. And that's all very fine. That's the way we do things here. This is the Californian model, where you put in $25 million and everybody gets rich in 18 months. And that's fine in California. The C curve is more common but less popular, where you put in $25 million and they spend that and then they come and ask you for some more. We don't do that either. What we do is this. We have some business angels who, out of their personal pockets, have got enough money to finance the company for a couple of years. And during this time, the company's deciding what it is. And by this stage, it's got a much clearer idea of what it is. It's got a team, so it can attract a bigger investment, and off it can go. And quite often during this phase, as I've mentioned, it can change its mind about what it does. We had one company that started off using nanoparticles to make sunscreen, and it ended up with its main product being an additive to the fuel that goes in buses, which reduces particulate emission. So there's no hard and fast rule that it has to do what it said it was going to do on day one. Now, why do we have to go through all this pain and anguish? Well, it's quite difficult in the UK to get big money for an idea. You can get little money to develop an idea, which is what this is. But I believe certainly in parts of the States, all this stuff here is actually done informally before the company comes into existence. So the work is done, but not as a company. It's done as some guys talking in coffee shops around Stanford or around MIT. In the UK, we have to have a company in order to have something for the seed investments to put their money into, in order to do all this essentially pre-formation stuff. Now, I don't know how it works here. You might be able to get a government grant to do the thing properly straight off. But you do need to go through this company deciding what it is phase, and I don't think you can do that formally. I think it's got to be an interpersonal collaboration between some people who are getting to know each other. So I've called phase 2 cultural independence. This is where the university spin-out becomes indistinguishable from a regular startup company, and it's somewhere around the end of year 2. It depends on what sort of business it is. By then, the company should have developed its own plan, the team should be near completion, and it may or may not have the leader in place to take it to the next stage. You might have the leader that attracts the investment. You might have the investment that brings with it the new leader. Expect a change in management, danger. Expect a change in investor, more danger. You know, we've just spent 2 years learning how to manage these investors, and now we've got some different investors who are a lot more aggressive. So both those need thinking about. If you like, here's a picture of how it might change. When it starts, you've just got the academic and a manager. And as the investors put more and more money in, they will, of course, have more shares, but particularly have more influence. They might actually be able to make a much bigger non-financial contribution as well. But you must expect this. There's no point the academic saying, this company used to do everything I told it to and now it won't anymore. That's how things develop. And you've got to get used to it, because if you want their money, you have to do what they ask you. Now, I hesitate to raise this subject in this country, but we've had a few regime changes in the UK, and there are dangers because we've developed strategies that work in regime A, and now we have regime B, which might be a new government or it might be a new set of investors. So the first thing is to recognise that new investors may think differently from seed investors. I mean, it's not even may think, will think differently. They're not going to be the same. Recognise that new manager may well think differently from the rowing boat manager. When my successor took over from me at Oxford A Cemetery, we managed to overlap for 2 weeks before we had a big row. So it's a different person. You can only have one leader. Spend effort ensuring that all members of the company management understand why these changes are important. I've seen companies that have got new investors, and some of the management team have never spiritually accepted that. Oh, it was never like this when the old guys were in. Yeah, but the old guys ran out of money. So there's a big leadership issue about making sure that all the team are moving together. And again, avoid the temptation to use one value system in the other environment. Don't go trying to impress a bunch of new financial investors with chemical diagrams. It's very difficult. Yeah, it is very difficult. Don't think it's going to be easy. If anybody tells you it's easy, they haven't understood it. So a bit of advice to managers. Dealing with universities is tricky. Commercialization is not a university's main priority. They've spent centuries getting good at teaching and research. The university may well not understand your priorities, so it's up to you and your advisor to help them. I did have an amusing meeting with an academic. We'd just spent about 6 months raising £1.5 million for his spin-out company. And he came to see me one Monday morning and said, I've been thinking, it's always dangerous. And he said, I don't think we need to set up a company for this. You know, and the guy who just spent a year of his life raising the £1.5 million was going across the table reaching for his throat. So no, get down. And the academic said, I don't think we need a company for this. So I said, well, what will they get for their money? And he said, well, they could just sponsor research in my group for £1.5 million. Yes. And what would they get? Well, if anything came out of it, I could tell them about it. So I said, well, I don't think they'll give you £1.5 million on that basis. So he said, oh, okay, well, shall we stay with the company idea then? So I said, I think that would be best. So we did. And it was a successful company. But you must remember that these people are bright and they go away on Friday and they think about things. So it's up to you to help them understand why telling the investor that you don't want a company but you still want his money is not a viable strategy. So conclusions on spin-outs. They involve more than one value system. This is a challenge for managers and advisors, but it's worth the pain because significant benefits can be won. And if you don't understand this, it may well kill you, or at least kill your company. Right, and that's the end of the spin-out section. So now we're on the dirty tricks. Remember, our philosophy is that we support researchers who wish to transfer technology. You can't make them do it. The researchers' interests are key. Our most critical asset is their confidence in us, and we generate this confidence by internal marketing. I would say half our energy is still marketing technology transfer inside the University of Oxford to researchers and to administrators. The university IP policy and its reward system is, of course, a way of generating enthusiasm, but particularly employing high-quality staff who can speak both research and industry is a way of enthusing researchers, because they're giving you their ideas, which some of them value higher than their children. It's what they've devoted their lives to. And if you appear offhand, or worse still, incompetent, they won't tell you about the good stuff. Yeah. We've got about 1,000 projects currently open from 10,000 researchers, so 10%. And that's fine. I'll more of that in a minute. Now, when people start this in universities, they say, right, we'll have a technology audit, we'll go and see what the good stuff is, then we'll know what to commercialise. And I've caricatured this as an event-based technology audit. And what you do is you phone Professor Important and say, I want to come and see you to see if you've got anything that I can commercialise. And he's polite and says, yes, by all means, come down. So you go and see him. And what happens is he remembers what he's done for the last 3 weeks. And for the next 3 weeks, he'll probably remember that you've been to see him. So you get about 6 weeks' worth of inventions. Now, remember, I've got 40 project managers and there are 10,000 researchers. This is not going to work. Worse than that, this can be counterproductive because when you've been and seen him, there are 3 possible outcomes. 1, you take an hour of his time and tell him he's got nothing worth patenting. 2, you take an hour of his time and he tells you he's got something worth patenting and you tell him you disagree with him. Or 3, you find something good. Now, outcomes 1 and 2 are very counterproductive for a tech transfer office who is trying to establish a loving relationship with researchers, because essentially you've insulted this man by saying you've taken an hour of his time and he's got nothing of value. And there's a better way of achieving outcome 3. And the better way is what I've called relationship-based technology auditing. And what you do here is you have an ongoing relationship between the tech transfer staff and the researchers. Not an event-based thing, a relationship-based thing. So that whenever they have an idea, if they want to, they know you're there and they can come and see you. So you get inventions captured whenever they occur. Now you could, if you like, call this setting up a lighthouse to attract the researchers. Now, I know lighthouses are supposed to warn people away from rocks, so perhaps I should call this a beacon rather than a lighthouse. But the idea is we spend a lot of effort on general marketing inside the university, not on specific marketing. So mail shots, newsletters, magazine articles, we've got a massive website. If the Department of anything wants a lecture on patenting, someone from ISIS goes and does it. If the University Student Physics Society want a lecture on commercialization, someone from ISIS goes and does it. If the business school wants to run a course on IP training, someone from ISIS goes and does it. This is a lot of so-called unpaid work, but it's really marketing work. You can do a lot with local radio, local TV and local newspapers, and you can do a lot with national media. If an Oxford spin-out is mentioned in the Financial Times in London, someone's family will read it. If it's mentioned in the Oxford Mail, someone's wife or husband will read it and say, I see your colleague's got a spin-out company, why haven't you got one yet? So national and local media, externally media, can have an impact internally. And we do a lot of that. We can always do more of that. More than that, there's the social stuff. So if there's a departmental seminar, someone from ISIS goes, they'll have lunch in a college and be chatting to someone. You meet people in the street. In other words, the technology transfer staff live in the same world as the researchers. When I was a research student from 69 to 72, all university IP was owned by the national government. And it was administrated in London by an organisation called the National Research and Development Council. And that was for all universities in the whole of the UK. And what happened is, once every 2 years, a man in a suit would come to our lab from London. He'd come from London to Oxford on the train, come to the engineering department, and he'd come to our lab and say, have you invented anything? And we'd say, no. And then he'd get back on the train and go back to London. So it didn't take much of our time. He felt he'd done his job, and nothing happened. Now, that is exactly the opposite of what I'm recommending with this living in the same world as the researchers. And I really do believe the sociology of this is the most critical factor when you're trying to stimulate this cross-cultural communication. Now, here's a bit of pretend science. If I'm talking about how do I, as a tech transferer, attract inventions from the academics, if we take all the inventions in the university and I label them as the ones I want to see and the ones I'm not bothered about, you get some sort of curve where the inventions up here at the right-hand end are the ones that I want to see, and this is the stuff that I don't want to see because I don't think there's any value in it. Now, this I've called the attractiveness of the invention. Yeah. So, this attractiveness, I would say, computer's jammed, is a function of the strength of the science, because I don't want to be spending my patent budget on science which is weak, and a parameter that I've called the commercializability of the academic. Now, this again is sensitive stuff. These are the personal traits of this individual. And by this I mean, do they turn up on time for meetings? Can they speak English as well as science? Do they look presentable? Have they got any embarrassing habits that are going to repel potential investors? It's all very personal stuff. And I suggest that the attractiveness of the project is a function of these two things, and these two things only. Now, you will grant that someone doing science in a leading university is going to be good at science. Anyone doing weak science in a leading university is gleefully exposed by their colleagues in very short time. So this S is actually a constant. In other words, the attractiveness of this project to me as a tech transferer comes down simply to the commercializability of the individual academic. Now, you will remember that I told you that to start a tech transfer project in Oxford, the academic chooses to come to ISIS Innovation. This actually involves a journey of 2 miles up Banbury Road. And of course, the people who do this are the ones with the high commercializability, because the ones who aren't interested don't bother putting in the effort. So this starts to fill itself from the top. The length of this arrow being the amount of the number of technology transfer projects we've got going at any one time. So I don't know how far down here this arrow comes, but I do think it starts at the top. Now that's fine and dandy, except for Dr. Quiet. Dr. Quiet has invented a cure for cancer, but he's so quiet and shy that he never comes out of his lab. So he's certainly not going to get on a bus or his bicycle and travel 2 miles to see me. And the model as I've presented it to you so far would miss him. However, in each department in Oxford, there is an ISIS Innovation fan supporter. It might be someone who's made some money from tech transfer. It might be someone who expects to make some money from tech transfer. Or it might just be someone who is not interested in money, but just thinks that technology transfer is the right thing for a leading university to do. And these people are, in general, the departmental busybodies who are around everywhere. They know what's going on. They're in and out of everybody's lab. They're in the coffee room. They're first in the morning. They're last out at night. They know what's going on. And what happens is I get a phone call from the ISIS supporter in the Department of Materials Science saying, you need to send one of your project managers to see Dr. Quiet because he's got some good stuff that you need to know about. Now, this, I admit, is now an event-based technology audit, which I've already told you we don't do. But the distinguishing feature is that this is a technology audit where we know there's something worth going for. And the result is that Dr. Quiet gets dragged up into the killing zone and we get a new project because we can reassure him and work with him. Now, this was all something that I'd made up. This whole diagram was all just out of my head and theoretical. And there was no evidence that it was true until about 10 years ago, we had an offer from some venture capitalists to give us £20 million. What happened was, Oxford Chemistry Department, I think, is the biggest chemistry department in the Western world, certainly bigger than anything in America, and it ran out of space, and it needed a new building. And the new building was going to cost £60 million. And Oxford Chemistry Department had saved up £10 million, so they were £50 million short, and it wasn't going to happen. Mr. Blair, the then Prime Minister, said, my government will give you £30 million if you can find the other 30. So we were then £20 million short. ISIS had done a couple of deals with a bank, and I knew the head of the bank who was doing, the head of this section who was doing this, and he said, "Okay, Oxford, we will give you £20 million in exchange for half Oxford University's interest in chemistry licenses and chemistry spin-outs for the next 15 years. I mean, he started at £15 million in 20 years, and we negotiated round, and we ended up with £20 million in 15 years. Now, the head of the university got me in a corner and said, "Is this a good deal? Should we sign it?" I'd no idea what was going to come out of Oxford's chemistry department for the next 15 years. How could I have? But I said, well, look at the ways it can go wrong. Either nothing comes out, in which case you've got a £60 million building and it's cost you £10 million, good deal, or they make a pile of money, in which case you make a pile of money because we've only sold them half of the university's entitlement, so we did it, and we did the deal, and it was a great success. Now, as a result of giving us £20 million, they demanded an event-based technology audit because they wanted to know what they'd invested in, not unreasonably. And as I've explained, I don't like event-based technology audits because they annoy academics, and annoying academics is a bad thing. So I said, okay, what we'll do, there are 80 chemistry faculty in Oxford, so I said, right, we'll organise 10 lunches, and you can invite 8 chemists to lunch, and you can come, and we'll have someone from ISIS Innovation there to make sure that you play fairly, and we'll chat over lunch about the work they're doing. So it's not an aggressive go to their lab and take an hour of their time. You have to give them lunch. And so we did that. And so that was a quite gentle event-based technology audit, the result of which was no new major chemistry projects. So in other words, this had actually done what it was supposed to do and had brought out the good stuff. And that audit which we were forced into was a good way of checking that what I'm telling you is actually worthwhile. Now, I told you that ISIS Innovation had supported itself with industrial sponsorship. And it did this by establishing the Oxford Innovation Society. This is a club. It's got about 40 members at any time, and they pay an annual fee for membership. And the benefits are, we will help them find research in the university that's good, that they need to know about. So when we file a patent application that's of interest to them, we tell them about it, and they get 30 days prior notice before anybody else knows about it. We organise 3 meetings a year that they come to, and if they want, we can do customised research presentations. So they send their technical director, and we wheel through a research group every hour for a day, and they can talk to them about their current research activities. The companies like it because they're talking about unpublished work. The researchers like it because they're talking to rich people. And as a researcher, talking to rich people is in general a good thing. And there's lots of newsletters and portfolios. And if you want to know any more, there's tons of this stuff on the website. Now, this is an Oxford Innovation Society meeting. It looks like a jolly dinner. It is not a jolly dinner. It is jolly, but it's not only a jolly dinner. The evening starts with an academic presentation in the university lecture theatre, and I asked the academic to speak addressed to intelligent teenagers. The members of this society are all sorts of industry, accountants, lawyers, service businesses, real estates, all sorts of people, and I want the Oxford academic to be impressive about their work, but in everyday language, which they do brilliantly. Then one of the members of the society, who's paid for everybody's dinner, is invited to give a speech on a business topic of their choosing, which turns out to be what a great firm they are, because this is a very influential group of people. We then take them into one of the older colleges in Oxford. This one is Trinity College, but there's several that look like this, and we give them some champagne. Throughout this process, there's quite a lot of alcohol involved, I should say, and then we give them dinner. Now, each member of the society gets 2 tickets for this dinner, and so it can be the head of the company and a major customer, or the UK managing director and the chairman from the States, or it can be the head of the sales department and one of his favoured employees who he wants to give a treat to. I'm not bothered who they invite, it's just 2 members of the company. There's all the ISIS project managers and those academics that we decide to invite. So this is a highly engineered thing. The seating plan for this is on the wall at ISIS Innovation for 2 weeks before the dinner. and everybody has an input. So they'll say, could you put me between him and her because I want to get them talking together about this? Or don't put these two together because they always fight. So you've got someone raising money for a spin-out sitting next to someone who's looking to invest in a spin-out in his area. So it is highly structured. The last seating plan of these I went to, I got the seating plan and it said version 14. So it is highly structured. A friend from Geneva came to this and she was so impressed. They've set up the same thing for the Lake Geneva Innovation Society, which is Geneva University and Lausanne University, and they do the same thing. But in a way of getting people, oh, and I should say there's after dinner drinks, as a way of getting people talking together, when people meet at the third or fourth one of these, they have a different relationship from what they would have had if they'd only had 4 business meetings. So I commend this to you. I mentioned the Begbroke Science Park. It's owned by the university. There's a piece of the Department of Materials. This is pure, proper university research, electron microscopes and all that. There's also a couple of innovation centres where anybody who wants to start a business can have a room for a month and try it. They don't have to sign a 5-year agreement or anything. There's also a lot of spin-out companies. And in the middle here is a cafe. And the idea is that people from all these different activities get to know each other. So if someone in the Department of Materials is thinking of starting a spin-out company, they know somebody who's got one and they can tell them what it's like. If someone in a spin-out company needs a micrograph of something, they've probably got a mate in here who's got access to an electron microscope. So there's a lot of cross-cultural stuff goes on in the coffee bar. About ISIS Enterprise and economic impact. I told you that we set up ISIS Enterprise to sell consultancy in technology transfer. And it was a response to some market demand. Being Oxford, we get a lot of people who want to come and have a look round. So everybody who asks gets the free 1 hour. And we tell, all the stuff I'm telling you, but in a sort of rather more presentational style. And with some of the less embarrassing anecdotes. They get how we do stuff. If you look on the ISIS website, there's the thing called the ISIS standard presentation, and you can read it to yourself, and it'll tell you what we do. But what was happening is, after these, we get, say, 6 Italian technology transfers would come over and have the 1 hour, and then they'd start sending us after-sales inquiries. So they'd send us a patent and say, what would you do with this patent? Or they'd send us a heart-rending letter about a difficult academic that they were having trouble with, and how would we handle it? And we thought, well, just a minute, you haven't bought anything, and yet you're wanting free consultancy. So we thought what we need to do is to set up a business unit to sell this stuff, which is what ISIS Enterprise does. And as you saw from my results slide, it's a rapidly growing business. So we have some long-term working partnerships. We've been working with one of the UK government research councils for about the last 5 years on helping them set up tech transfer for the research that they fund. We have short-term consultancies. I went to Antwerp for 2 days to take part in the audit of their technology transfer office, for example. We run things in companies. This is for companies as well as universities. We will help a new university set up a tech transfer office, for example, is something we've done. Sometimes somebody will want to send an individual to work in ISIS's offices for a month to sort of try and learn some of the unwritten rules that I mentioned to you. And you can see all about that at isisenterprise.com. While we're on websites, this is the ISIS website. If you're interested, you might like to look at this section here called Information for Oxford Researchers. We've written brochures on patenting, licensing, spin-outs, consultancy, seed funding, all that stuff. Because, as I mentioned to you, part of our mission is educating the researchers in Oxford about this stuff. And that's all available, and you're welcome to it. Similarly, there's a section on ISIS Enterprise and stuff on spin-out companies. And there's also a way of searching for latest technologies. So if you're working in a particular technical area and you want to know what Oxford's invented in that, you can put that there. It goes slightly better because you can actually have a feed. So when we file another patent in that area, we'll tell you about it later. So this is all standard external marketing stuff. But it also, of course, has an internal marketing impact. While we're on websites, this is Said Business School, Oxford, Entrepreneurship Centre. One thing that they do a lot of is webcasting lectures. There's certainly some of my lectures there. If you like that sort of thing, you can play about in there. So, getting towards the end, a bit about culture change. Again, it sounds a bit manipulative to say we are trying to initiate a culture change, but it is simply honest. That is what we've been trying to do in Oxford for the last 15 years. And if we're going to change the culture in a university, I think there are 3 parameters that have to develop. The first one I've called the entrepreneurial culture of researchers. Now, of course, researchers are entrepreneurial. That's what research is. They've been entrepreneurial because they keep inventing new science all the time. So it's not that sort of entrepreneurialism. I mean commercially entrepreneurial. In other words, thinking that business is okay. They're good people to talk to. They may have something that's useful to us. They're an asset. So that's the first parameter. The second parameter is the university itself, and I mean the university administration and the amount of effort the university wants to devote to technology transfer. You can't do this unless the university is prepared to put resources into it and unless the head of the university wants to do it. I've helped a number of universities set up tech transfer offices, and what they generally do is recruit a bright person and tell them to set up a technology transfer office. And I always say to them, go and see the head of the institution, either the vice-chancellor or the rector or whatever you call them, look them in the eye and say, do you really want to do this? Because it's not going to be quick and it is going to be expensive. And if the head of the institution is not committed to this, it's probably going to be impossible. And the reason I say it's going to be impossible is that the institution has got lots of big-name scientists in it, Nobel Prize winners and all that. And what will happen at some stage in the tech transfer process, you will have a fight with one of these people, and they will go to the head of the institution and say, those idiots in the technology transfer office are ruining my research, and they all need shooting. Now, if the head of the university wasn't sure about tech transfer in the first place, and now he's got this person who's brought in lots of glamour and glitter telling him that you're counterproductive, you're probably dead. If, on the other hand, the head of the institution thinks you're a good thing, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, then at least you're going to be invited in to explain your apparently stupid actions before they shoot you. Now, you still might not win, but at least you're only going to be shot when you've had a chance to defend yourself. So I think the commitment of the head of the institution is probably a non-negotiable in this field. I mean, no doubt someone will have an idea where the head of the institution was against it, but everybody else thought it was a good idea and got away with it. But I was lucky in that just after I started at ISIS, there was a new vice-chancellor who had spent some time in Chicago, where commercial things happen. And he was a historian, actually, but he could see that this was a worthwhile exercise, so he supported it. I mean, he supported it insofar as every month I'd write him a letter about what brilliant things we've done. You know, we've started 2 spin-outs. And he put them into his speech. So suddenly, his university is looking really commercially active, so he's feeling good about it. And by the way, this was another nice letter from Tim Cook. So the Tech Transfer Office is building itself up. Now, we do a monthly report on our progress, and the first page is deliberately good news and achievements, and it goes to the Vice-Chancellor, and he looks at it. So if you're the Vice-Chancellor of a university, I've no doubt you get a lot of unpleasant mail, because people always write to the head of the institution when they're unhappy about something. And yet, from ISIS, some good news. And so he feels more inclined to think that technology transfer is a proper thing for an ancient university. This internal marketing, I'd spent a lot of time talking about internal marketing to researchers, but internal marketing to administrators is really important. The same goes for heads of department. If a researcher in the engineering department does a license, send an email to the head of the engineering department saying, one of your guys has just done a great thing. He'll feel good. He'll feel good about the guy who's done the great thing, so he might get a bigger lab. So this internal marketing at all levels in the institution is really important. So that's the second of the 3 cultural change parameters. And the third one I've called the local professional environment. I mean, all the commercial activity around the university which we want to think the university is a good idea. When I was in business in Oxford, I used to run a little analytical instruments company in Oxford from 1983 to 7. It would never have occurred to me for a second to look to Oxford University for any help in anything. Oxford University was a place with nice buildings that I used to take visitors to look around the colleges, but it never occurred to me that it was a component in any sort of commercial activity, because it wasn't in those days. It's different now. But that local professional environment also needs to be developed to see the university as something of value. Now, I think all 3 of these parameters must proceed together. And the reason that I say they must proceed together is if it gets out of balance, there's a potential for disaster. So, for example, if we put some magic chemical in the drinking water in Oxford that turned all our researchers into enthusiastic entrepreneurs overnight, remember there's 10,000 of them, imagine what would happen. They'd all start looking around for commercial partners, they'd all start signing things that they didn't understand, there would be absolute chaos. So if you're going to have entrepreneurial researchers, you need to have a well-developed entrepreneurial support and administration system, otherwise it'll blow up on you. Similarly, if the local environment suddenly thought the university was great and all started knocking on doors and coming in and asking for collaborations, the university would collapse under the strain and start getting stuff stolen and taken out without any benefit to the university. So they must proceed together, and it takes a long time. But I think the university must lead the change for 2 reasons. First reason is that the ideas are in the university. So if we want to start stimulating a change, we'd better put the activity close to where the ideas are. You know, chemical reactions work if the catalyst is close to the reactants, and that's the same here. Before the university invested in ISIS, it did about 1 spin out every 4 years, because there'd be one unusual academic who did a spin out all by himself. When we spun out Oxford Asymmetry, Steve Davis contacted us. The university wasn't really involved much. After ISIS, 4 spin outs a year, so 16 times as much, because the university puts very modest resource in. Don't forget, Oxford's spending 400 million on research, and at the time it was spending about 100,000 on patents. So it's a tiny catalyst cost to provoke a massive result. So first thing, ideas are in the university, so the university needs to lead this. Second thing, it's more defensive. If the university doesn't lead it, the university might not receive its fair share of the benefits. Because if, for example, the local bankers or the local investors are leading it, they're going and doing deals with the academics, and nobody tells the university. So the university doesn't get anything. The academics get new cars, the local investors get nice companies, university's still short of money. So for those 2 reasons, I think the university needs to lead the change. Now, so here we are, we know all this stuff, so now we want to design our entrepreneurial university. So what do we need? Well, obviously we need some entrepreneurial scientists who are going to be commercially active where the stuff's going to come from, and there will of course be other academics who aren't. There'll be some policies, and there'll be a tech transfer office, and it'll all be joined together. And you might think when you've done this, hooray, we've now got our commercially active university. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but no, you haven't. And the reason you haven't is that you've concentrated on the inside. And the university actually is a subculture in a barter economy. The university is consistent within itself, but all around it there are people trading and doing business, all in their own interests, not in the interest of the university. And so there's the university, and Here's a couple more universities in the area. And then there's all the commercial companies. There's the investors, the lawyers, the headhunters, the manufacturing companies, all that lot. And they're all busily doing stuff to and for each other. But it's worse than that, because there are all these individual brokers, managers, consultants who are commercially active in the area, doing stuff all over the place. And as well as all that, there's the students. There's our present students. There's our past students, some of whom are now major industrial figures. And there's our future students who we want to get involved in this. And it's only when you've got all this lot and it's all starting to connect with itself that the university is really playing its full part in the regional economy. And this takes a long time to build. When I started at ICIS Innovation in 1997, a gang of us were funded from different universities, were funded to go to America and find out what the trick was, because it was generally thought that America was good at this, so we should go there and see how they do it, then we can copy it. And so there were about 6 tech transferers from Oxford, Cambridge and other universities, and 6 university vice-chancellors all got on a plane and went to America. And we went to MIT, Stanford, Harvard, University of California, and were entertained very generously and lavishly by their tech transfer officers, who told us all the stuff that I'm telling you about, how they do it and how it works and all that stuff. And it was terrific. It was absolutely marvellous. I'd been in the job about 6 months, so it was great. So I got back to Oxford, and the directors of ICIS Innovation clustered round and said, "OK, Tim, what's the trick?" So I said, "Well, the good news, boys, is that there is a trick." "Oh, good. What is it?" The bad news is the trick is that you should have started 20 years ago, like they did in Boston and Stanford. Then you'd be the same as they are now. So building this thing takes a long time. It will probably take a shorter time now there are more case studies of how to do it. But you should not expect this to be quick, and you should not expect it to be cheap, because it isn't. Now, that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, because university research, the output of university research, is a hugely undervalued commodity commercially. I mean, it's probably valued academically, but I think there are opportunities both for regional development and indeed for the development of the university itself, which don't need much resource to get a disproportionately positive reaction. So for those of you who are thinking of going into the university world, I have some advice on how to manage a university. Now, if you're going to be the Vice-Chancellor of a university, this is particularly relevant, but if you're going to be the head of a department in the university, or even if you're going into a technology transfer office and you want to start working with a university, this picture may be helpful. And I think managing a university is like leading an elephant with a thin rubber band. That's the university, and that's you. And my recommendation is that you walk along with the elephant in whichever direction the elephant is going until it gets used to you and starts to trust you. At this point, you can pull gently on your rubber band. If you pull too hard or too suddenly, you will break your rubber band and have no further influence over the elephant. Now, this is all very jolly. I have seen this happen in universities where a very experienced industrial manager comes in and is given charge of a division of the university. He can see in days what needs to be done, so he does what he did in his company. He gets the management team together and says, "Right, I've seen what you're all doing wrong. Here's the new plan. You do that, you do that, you do that, you do that. Report back in a month and it'll be great." And the senior management team go away from his office. They get together in the coffee room and say, "Here comes another one. He hasn't understood how it works. So what are we going to do with it? Oh, he won't last. He'll be here about a year." Now, in my case, I was that manager. I turned up in Oxford in May 1997, and after 3 months, I decided that Oxford University was a dysfunctional organisation, and I resigned. I went storming self-righteously to the university finance director and said, look, I'm ever so sorry, I've made a mistake. I can't do this. This is a dysfunctional organisation and I resign. So there. And he said, what do you mean dysfunctional organisation? I said, look, there are 3 completely separate management systems. There are the Oxford colleges, who have their authority from the Queen, by the way. They have a charter signed by the Queen saying you're an Oxford college. And they've got a head of college who thinks he's God and isn't subject to any sort of discipline as far as I can see. And then you've got the academic departments with the head of department who all behave as if they're God. And then independent of both those, there's this administration of all these officers and committees. And they're headed by the Vice-Chancellor, who the popular press thinks ought to be God. So where I come from in industry, everybody has a boss. And the rules are, don't annoy your boss and you won't get fired. Here, nobody has a boss. In fact, even the direction up is not defined. And all the tricks I know don't work here. In fact, they seem to annoy people. Because, I was trying industrial management in university. And he said, well, calm down. Let's just think about this for a moment. It's been in business for about 900 years. The net assets are conservatively £2 billion. It has quite a good reputation throughout the world for its teaching and research. Do you think your analysis may be faulty? And of course, he was right, because if I start my speech on the basis that Oxford University is a dysfunctional organisation, I'm probably wrong, because it does actually work quite well. Now, Oxford is an extreme example of universities, but the DNA I'm talking about exists in all academics, so you will see it elsewhere. And so I thought, well, he's right. I just haven't understood how it really works. And it isn't at all like any of my factories were, because it isn't. So I went away and thought for another 3 years and didn't resign. And I worked out how it works. And because we've got 5 minutes, I'll tell you how it works, then you'll know. So I described these 3 axes: college, departments, administration, all populated by anarchists. And as such, of course it can't work. But every year the university publishes a red book called the Oxford Calendar, which has got the names of all its academics in it. And then it's got lists of all its colleges and all its departments and all its committees. And there's an index in the back of the academics' names with page references. So my friend Graham Richards, at the time, was the chairman of the chemistry department, so he was the boss of chemistry. He was a fellow of Brasenose College, and he was the chairman of the Committee for Continuing Education. In other words, he has at least one position on all 3 axes. So these are not linear axes of people doing one thing. It's a dense, 3-dimensional matrix of very clever people caring about the place. So when I talk to one of these guys, I'm actually hitting the system in several different places. So I thought, well, that's interesting. How can I use this knowledge to my benefit? And remember I told you that ISIS was getting £40,000 for tech transfer, and the university was spending, I think, about 100 million on research. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll write a business plan, and I'll find out who is going to adjudicate this business plan. So you can look up in the book and see who's on the finance committee. And there were a couple in my college, and there were a couple in the engineering department where I did my DPhil, and there were some elsewhere that I couldn't see any way of getting to until I noticed they were on the steering committee for the Magdalen College Science Park. And I got invited to make a presentation about what I was going to do with ISIS Innovation to the steering committee of the Magdalen College Science Park. So I engineered to meet all these individuals at different times and said, do you realise this university spends £100 million on research and is spending £40,000 on technology transfer? And ISIS Innovation is raising £300,000 from industrial sponsorship. Don't you think the university ought to be embarrassed by this? And I said this to all of them separately. Now, I wasn't at the committee meeting where they reviewed my business plan, but my business plan said, this university spends £100 million on research and £40,000 on technology transfer. And one of the committee will have said, yes, I'd heard that somewhere. And they're raising, £250,000 from industrial sponsorship. And he's saying that if we do this, if we increase the patent spend I think it was 100,000 I asked for in the first year. Well, we should do this, shouldn't we? So by understanding the elephant, you could make the elephant do a few tricks you want it to do. However, there is a warning, and that is the caption says, OK, I've got him, now hit him with the rock. But you should never think you're ever going to have total control of the university you're working with, because nobody has. And it's vital to remember this when you're trying to initiate a culture change, because the best you can do is influence. You can't ever dictate. And I think by doing that, you might be able to make your universities do some tricks that they don't currently do. So, a couple of conclusion slides. I've told you at length how difficult all this is. So, since it's so difficult, why would anybody ever want to do it? Well, who benefits? The first people who benefit from technology transfer are the universities who bother to do it. In the UK at the moment, universities are struggling to look useful. We absorb a lot of the taxpayers' money. And certainly some taxpayers see universities as a place where people have a nice living for not working very hard. So universities need to look useful. And one good way of looking useful is creating employment. So if you start companies, this is good. Everybody will agree this is good. The politicians will like you. The general public will like you. So that's good. So university reputation is the first beneficiary from this. This is long before you get any money back. If you start your tech transfer office, you start a company in week 10, it's in the local paper, there you are looking useful. The second people who benefit are the students. In Oxford, we have a student society called Oxford Oxford Entrepreneurs. It has 3,000 student members of graduate students and undergraduates. And they organise events, they have Dragon's Den events and competitions. They get big name business people. I think they got Steve Jobs to come and talk to them before he died. And they can, because they're Oxford, they can get big name people. And they have a tremendous fun. And what that does is it means that when they come to ISIS as research students, they already know about patents and cash flow and have got a network of useful investors. So the students benefit massively from this. Of course, there's royalties and spin-out shares, put cash into the university. Now, the next people who benefit are the researchers. And the biggest benefit to researchers, apart from the money, is they find themselves talking to scientists who are coming from a non-university environment, from a commercial environment, who have a different way of looking at things and sometimes have assets and equipment that the university don't have. Quite often, the equipment in companies is more recent and more up-to-date than the equipment in universities. Research funding in the university benefits because for the licensees and spin-outs, we'll start funding research in the university. Industry benefits, obviously, because it gets new technology. But it's probably not going to get it. When I was running my analytical instruments business, if someone said you can have a day in Oxford University looking for technology, I would probably not have thought it worth my time taking a day away from the factory, because I've got a lot of stuff to do. It needs an intermediary to convince the industrialists that it's worth the effort. The economy, regional and national economy, benefits because you get new industries and new technology to existing ones. And of course, we are in RUSNANO, so I should say the investors benefit because they get big returns because the science they're investing in is high quality science. I told you that Oxford Asymmetry was sold for £300 million. The university got £11 million. So you can work out what the investors got. So, last slide, my conclusions. Opportunities exist in universities for economic development, for personal wealth creation, both inside and outside the university. And to realise these benefits, I'm absolutely convinced, needs competent intermediaries. We've, over the last 15 or 20 years, begun to develop an understanding of this interface in Oxford. And some of the principles that I've been expounding, I think, apply generally. Don't take the whole thing just take the underlying ideas. And ISIS Enterprise has now been set up to promote this. So thank you for your attention. Thanks to RUSNANO, and particularly to Natalia, who organised my visit here, organised this lecture, Eurasia Consortium, who've been working with RUSNANO for that. Thank you to you for coming. I look forward to as many questions as you can manage. Thank you.
Well, stamina of our lecture и ваше терпение, это, конечно, достойно уважения, коллеги. Без перерыва, но на какое-то времени посмотреть работу вашим практикам университете. Есть 10 минут на вопросы. If you have any questions, please 10 minutes, your
I was just thinking that potentially,
Okay, good trick question. Now, if I answer yes to this, it gives the lie to my statement that we don't interfere with what research is done. If, on the other hand, I answer no, you might say, well, what's the purpose of you? I think if I give you a weasel words answer, we put money into the university which is unconditional money. Most money that goes into universities is put in for a defined purpose. The money the university gets from our licenses and from our spin-outs is, if you like, free money. So they can spend it on whatever they want. I think the researchers, I mean, the way research is organised in Oxford is the researchers decide what research they're going to do. So no one tells them what to do. I mean, of course, they've got to raise the money for it, but by giving researchers some money, they don't all take their personal money personally. Some of them actually fund research in their groups with it, because there's stuff that they know wants doing that they can't get external funding for. So some of them buy themselves new cars, some of them fund research in their groups. So in that way, the money certainly enables researchers to do what they do more. So I think that's positive. I think the intellectual input to research helps. I am always frightened about subverting research into industrial problem solving. That's a nightmare for me, and I'm probably irrationally worried about that, and I probably shouldn't worry about it quite so much. Because, to be honest, Oxford researchers, you can't tell them what to do. They're not those sort of people. So I think the resources we generate are good, the knowledge we generate is good, the way we don't dictate to them what to do is good. So I think that's positive. So yes, I think it's a good thing.
looking at the numbers of researchers coming with to ISIS for ideas, is that an increasing number? Or?
Yes, it is increasing. I guess if I just go to the number of licenses, that's probably the easiest way to show it. But I can tell you how many open projects we've got. The way ISIS works is each project manager has about 40 cases. It's not, we designed it that way, and currently, well, last year we had 300 new disclosures. That was people coming to us. The year before we had 293 new disclosures. So that's going up. In terms of the number of open files we've got, there are 1,321 current open cases spread among 37 project managers. So, but it is all increasing. If I find the relevant slide, I can show you. Yeah.
Questions are very willing to pay for and answer what let's call this what it's all. Okay? So the license is this.
Yeah.
Not a result.
Yeah.
Okay? And to get from this to this,
Yep.
one, you have to pay money for this. Russian is very unwilling to do. question is solution. One solution might be throwing out so if you create this, and then another one you take this stop that off. But that still isn't fundamentally change the culture, which is buy this, don't with this, it's risk.
Yep.
Or it's failure, right?
Certainly.
And one thing Russians are good at is they buy risk, they don't buy opportunity, right? So my question is how do you create this culture of licensing? You know, the solution is the solution.
Yep.
In America, how it was created over about 40 years ago was university industry collaboration.
Yep.
They don't want to wait till you so any suggestions
Yep.
how to create this culture of licensing? Any answer on that?
Yes, exactly. Down the bottom of my garden is a big pile of branches that have fallen off trees, and every so often we set fire to them. And if we put the match against the big log, the match goes out. So the first point is, don't try and hit the big ones. The way we get the fire going is we light some little ones around the corner. And I think the solution to this, I'd like to point out that I arrived in Russia at 8:15 yesterday morning. So I don't speak with a profound knowledge of Russian culture, but I do speak with a profound knowledge of working in unhelpful atmospheres, which sounds as though that's what we're talking about. And I think the way to do it is to just start some tiny things. I mean, in a university, there may well be 2 or 3 academics who get this, but they've never done anything about it because in their institution it's not the thing for all the structural problems you're talking about. But far be it from me to advise the Russian government, but if there is one individual there who thinks this is a good idea, extremely modest funding and a bit of official blessing can start some little fires round the edge of the woodpile. I think there's no point going for a grand plan. I think a grand plan is too expensive, it's too big a risk, and they won't do it. But the way I did it in Oxford, Oxford is probably not as difficult to manage as Russia, but it might be, was I completely, most of the university hated the idea of ISIS Innovation. That's why it got no funding. My predecessor was fired. And when I joined ISIS Innovation, there was one project manager who had 120,000, was stressed out, and there were 2 secretaries who were at war and hadn't agreed on which word processing package they were going to use. So this is pretty far back. And the university was putting 40,000 a year in. So how was I going to change this when I'd finished quitting? And what I did was I said, the simplest thing is I will just work with those 1 or 2 academics who want to work with me. And I'll completely ignore the rest. Now, I think if you're going for something as big as a Russian university, working with 1 or 2 academics who are prepared to be convinced. Because as soon as these little fires start, you've then got some stories to promulgate. Even tiny stories. So then... Yeah.
60% is startups.
Yeah.
Sometimes people do in these markets because they can license it. Not because they can't, because the buyer, the licensee doesn't insist. They don't want to pay $50,000 for this because they don't have either the money or skill or time.
Right. So it's not the right thing for them to buy.
So they'll create a company. But what happens is that company will never amount to anything because this is an incremental technology. You're buying something else. So I'm talking about from the buyers creating a culture on the licensee. The licensees don't exist in Russia. So TPOs, or whatever, right? They've got this.
Yep.
They say to RUSNANO, Well, look, we've got this. We will focus on it. You can then invest money in and say, look, this is not a result. We don't pay money for something that's a result. Question is, how do you get a license in the market? Company, small company, big company, to start to say, we'll license this. Maybe officially for the way to build it.
Yeah.
But how do you get the marketplace to develop this culture to say, we'll license this from University A to C, we'll invest money, we'll invest skill, we'll invest talent, we've got a fly working, we will bring it from out.
Okay, well, I've got three suggestions. One is, if the regional government, or possibly national government, but I think regional government is more likely, really thinks this is something it wants to do, then it could offer financial incentives to companies to do this. You know, these small business type incentives, where a company can apply for reduced prices or government money or the avoidance of something unpleasant if it does something jointly with the university, whether it's a joint research or a license, don't care which. So that's the first thing that government, I mean, all governments can do is either give money or not give money. So you could do that. You could financially incentivize companies to do it. Looking from the other end, there may be schemes where instead of it being a one-year patent application, it's actually been funded to a working prototype. So it's close enough. I mean, one of the criticisms I get of university research is it's early stage. Well, of course it's early stage. It's a university. But you could, I mean, the reason it's early stage is because it's a university. We have a small seed fund in ISIS which puts in modest amounts of money to build a prototype or something to get it a bit close. It's still not a result in the terms you define a result, but it's less scary for the companies. So I would attack it from both ends. Now, there's a third contribution which happens in Cambridge, UK, but not in Oxford. In Cambridge, UK, there are quite a lot of consultancy companies who are set up to take this quarter of an idea and actually turn it into something which is attractive to a commercial company. They're Cambridge Consultants, PA Technology, lots of such companies. So if you like, I've given you perhaps a way of attacking it from the demand side, which I think is what you're talking about, something you could do on the supply side, but I don't think you'll ever get it far enough for major companies to want it. And then perhaps in the middle, if there's some scheme to set up, I'd call it a translation company or something like that. I don't pretend for a second this is easy, but it might be possible. Yes? No. I arrived in Moscow at 8:15 yesterday morning. I had an hour's sleep, and then I've given 2 lectures, and then this one, and that's it. So I think I said at the beginning, you know much more about Russia than I ever will. I know what I know, which is what I've laid out, and you know, I can't even manage Oxford University. I certainly can't manage Russia. I don't know whether anybody can manage Russia, but that's not my field of expertise. But I think you've got to start tiny. I mean, I think the reason Natalia invited me here was so that I could annoy you all by saying this stuff. So you can then go and annoy other people and something might happen. Is that right, Natalia?
Yes, 2 more questions and we will leave.
Sorry, say that again? How many patents? I can tell you. Now, I can tell you how many we've filed. I mean, in general, we file patents on about half the disclosures we get, and we throw away about half of those at the end of year 1, and we throw about half of the rest at year 2. We very rarely take things to international patents if we haven't licensed them. So no, I've not got the information with me, but not many, because it's a university, it's not a development company. Which means, to answer the question at the back, which means we sell practically everything earlier than we would if we were trying to maximize the value. But remember that my first priority is transferring technology. My second priority is making money. And that's the case in Cambridge as well. Depends on what countries. But I would guess 15,000, 20,000 pounds. We file our original patents always using patent attorneys, and we budget 3,000 or 4,000 pounds for that. We then take out a PCT, which gives us a longer time window before we get the international filing costs as a means of cost deferring. Yes, they get 60% of the royalties. Oh no, filing a patent is a cost, not a benefit. No. As soon as you do that, as soon as you say you can have £100 every time you file a patent, I mean anybody can file a patent. What happens is then you get masses of patents filed, so it's an adverse incentive. Yeah, okay.
Дорогие коллеги, спасибо вам большое еще раз за то, что вы пришли, за это полицейное побывание в течение часов без Мы еще раз говорим, организовали все это в рамках открытых мероприятий нашей базовой практики. Мы такие вещи будем делать. Если у вас есть к этому интерес, кстати говоря, вот коллега поднял любопытную тему, но это тема для такого длительного разговора о правовой подготовке, коммерциализации, формирования культуры и так далее. Это явно не в рамках переносного ответа на предыдущий. Поэтому, если мы будем говорить встреч в одном мероприятии, мы вас приглашаем. Если хотите, можете оставить свои позиции, и как минимум мы вышли вам презентацию. А вы остались, похоже, без обеда, поэтому мы готовы в нарушении правил открыть дверь на второй этаж, оттуда вы уже можете выйти спокойно. Там уже никаких протестов нет. Поэтому, если кто-то хочет пообедать здесь, в нашей столовой, на втором этаже, мы готовы вам это дело организовать. Если нет, то до следующих волнующих встреч. Спасибо всем большое.
Good fun.
I'm sorry, Tim. I would like to introduce myself. I'm the managing director in charge of infrastructure development.
And the best of luck.
Yes, I know. I try to build this network of technology centers at the core of which is technology transfer operation.
Yes.
Or at least it should be at the core. We'll see what happens. I would like to meet with you again and
sure.
Maybe
well, Natalia seems to be my local manager, but that email is my home, so you can always get me on that.
All right. Thank you once again.
Not at all. Well, I hope the elephant moves your way a bit.
I remember that string.
Yeah. It's important to remember it with universities.
Thank you, sir.
But elephants are used for friends as well.
I know. And in Russia we used to big things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Evgeny invented a clever model how to make incentives for involve more elephants.
You gotta keep them interested.
I've never thought of more elephants. It's a good question. Yeah, sure.
See, this issue about risk, it's a huge, this licensing culture is a huge thing, because it doesn't exist here at all.
I mean, it may be that we're trying to do something that's impossible. I mean, it may just not be possible.
Well, it may be possible, but again, it might, like in the States, it took 40 years.
Yeah.
And maybe that's...
I think all I'm trying to do really is say it's worth having a go. Because the
to try different stuff, there's got to be good or something.
And they're going to have to come up with a Russian version of it. But then I was working in the north of England in Sheffield, and we had to come up with a Sheffield version. It all starts with what's your institution like and what's the environment like. Because if you're trying to interface between two things, you need to know what the two things are like.
Well, there is not a lot of industry around Sheffield. Let's say, basically.
Well, Sheffield used to be the world's leader of steel and coal. I was born 7 miles from Sheffield.
But now it's practically university.
But you see, Leeds, which is 20 miles from Sheffield, had wool, and that went away. But Leeds is now a successful financial centre.
Yeah.
So it changed, and Sheffield didn't change. And the question is why? And one suggestion is that in Leeds, the people who were financing it were Jewish people. And so when the cloth industry went out, they just financed something else. Whereas in Sheffield, the people who were financing it were the steel makers, and they only knew about making steel.
But, well, to my opinion, Sheffield just transformed itself into a university city.
Yeah.
University. Well, actually, I would very much appreciate your reference. I found an interesting article on just empirical based on the technology transfer of the Swedish example. And may I send it to you? Just
Yeah, of course. I'll give you a card.
Thank you. I'm from PR office.
Right.
Yeah, well, actually, I have your...
Well, this stays here anyway, so it's here. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, do send that. I'll come back.
Хорошо, я сегодня, к счастью, поехала в гостиницу. Ну, чтобы мне не скучно было. Приезжаю в гостиницу, машину, 7 минут 11, 10 минут. Я звоню водителю, а я просто помогу. Ну что, я говорю, пораньше вы, кто знал? Да.
Когда не было, а тут было.
Я говорю, когда вас ждать в Украине, сами ночью в 20. Вот идем, вижу, как самый на кольцо, и что ты делаешь? Ну, становится. А это его основное,
И ничего.
ну ничего, подъехал мужичок, мы сели